There is a moment in the very first Lemongrab episode where this tall yellow creature, fresh out of his chamber, eyes too wide, voice already cracking, stares at the kingdom that has just been handed to him and screams that everything in it is unacceptable, not unfair, not unwelcome, unacceptable. The word he keeps coming back to for the rest of his strange, painful existence. And almost nobody talks about how much of a tragedy he really is, how Adventure Time keeps quietly returning to him every season or so, just to twist the knife a little deeper. Tonight on Pine Hat, we are going through all of it. Every appearance, every cruelty, every quiet hint that he never had a chance from the second he opened his eyes. So get comfortable, turn the lights down, we will be here a while, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. To understand Lemongrab, you have to start in a laboratory. The Candy Kingdom in Adventure Time is a state held together almost entirely by one person, Princess Bubblegum, and the candy people who live in it are her creations in a real and literal sense. She grew them, she raised them, and the show treats that relationship as ambiguous from very early on. She is part queen, part mother, part scientist, and the people she has invented to live in her kingdom often behave like children who have never quite grown up. They are soft, easily wounded, not entirely capable of running their own lives, and that, the show implies, is by design. Bubblegum is not a cruel ruler, but she is a paranoid one, and the world she has built is one where she always wants to be the one in charge of everyone in it. The plot that gives birth to Lemongrab begins when she ages herself down. In a Season 3 episode called Too Young, an accident with her age machine leaves her trapped in the body of a 13-year-old. She still has her adult mind, but the show takes its own premise seriously and treats it as a real problem. A 13-year-old cannot, by the rules of the kingdom, legally hold the throne. So she has to give it to somebody. The legal succession plan she falls back on, the show implies, is a contingency she had already built. Long before this episode begins, she had grown an heir. She had grown the Earl of Lemongrab. He was prepared in her castle laboratory and left in some kind of glass chamber, waiting. We never see the precise moment of his making, but every later episode keeps coming back to that laboratory, that chamber, that hatching scene, and treats it as a kind of birth ritual. He is made out of lemon and out of candy, with a body too tall, with limbs too long, with a voice already cracked and broken when it leaves his throat for the very first time. The show never tells us how old he is in any human sense. He behaves like an infant in some moments, and like a brittle, middle-aged tyrant in others. And the gap between those two is one of the central tragedies of the character. The thing you have to sit with, when you start thinking about Lemongrab, is that he did not ask to be born. He did not ask for his body or his voice or his temperament. He was made to be the holder of a job, the regent of a kingdom, and from the very first second of his life, he was set up to fail it. Bubblegum did not raise him. She did not teach him language slowly. She did not socialize him. She did not show him how to speak to other candy people without frightening them. She built him as a contingency, left him in a chamber, and only opened it when she needed him. The show does not condemn her for this in plain language. Adventure Time rarely condemns Bubblegum in plain language about anything. It instead lets her decisions accumulate episode by episode until you start to feel the shape of what she has done. The shape in Lemongrab's case is that of a person who exists because of an experiment and who is then handed responsibility he is incapable of bearing and then judged for not bearing it. From the very first scene he is in, the candy people are afraid of him. Finn and Jake are afraid of him. Bubblegum herself is afraid of him. He is the only person in the room who does not yet know how to be anything but what he is. There is a reading of Lemongrab, which the show seems to be reaching for from the first time we meet him, in which he is a person with severe and untreated psychological pain. He is bright in flashes, he understands law, he understands order, he understands music, which becomes very important later on. But he cannot regulate himself. His emotional volume sits permanently at maximum. His default response to any disagreement, any disturbance, any contact with another mind that is not his own, is to scream. And his scream is not a stylized cartoon yell. It is, in the show, the literal voice of the character. He shouts the way another character speaks. There is no softer version available to him. Read this way, every later episode he is in is an essay on what happens to a creature like that when nobody comes to help him. The show does not give him a therapist. It does not give him a tutor. It does not give him a friend who can sit with him without flinching. It gives him a castle, a population, and absolute authority over both. And then it walks away. The earldom of Lemongrab is, in effect, a banishment dressed up as a promotion. Bubblegum builds a kingdom for him out on the edge of the candy world and tells him to go and live there. And then she comes back occasionally to check on the damage. I want to slow down here for a moment, because this is the thing that makes Lemongrab a tragedy rather than a joke. Every detail of his existence is the result of a decision somebody else made. Somebody else decided what he would look like. Somebody else decided what his voice would sound like. Somebody else decided what he would be in charge of. Somebody else decided when he would be born, where he would live, what kind of mind he would have. He never had a chance to choose any of it. And from the first second he is allowed to be conscious, he is told again and again that the way he is unacceptable. He is the one who screams the word, but it is the world around him that uses it on him first. The show plays a very long game with this idea. It does not announce it in his first episode. In Too Young, you are mostly meant to be unsettled by him, and to laugh a little, and to side with Bubblegum and Finn when they take her crown back. Lemongrab is a problem to be solved, but the show keeps quietly returning to the laboratory in the back of your mind. Every time he comes back, you remember a little more clearly that he was built, that he was switched on, that nobody asked him whether he wanted to exist before he was given the keys to a kingdom. And the more you remember that, the harder it gets to keep laughing at him. In a later episode, after he has begun to try to make a family for himself, we see him return to the same laboratory equipment that produced him. He goes back to the place he came out of. He gathers raw lemon flesh and candy ingredients, and he tries with the same kind of machinery to produce another creature like himself. The reading the show invites here is unmistakable. He is trying to do for somebody else what was done to him, but with love attached to it this time. He does not have the tools to do it well, and what comes out is, by every measure, just as broken as he is. But the impulse is recognizable. He does not want to be alone. He never wanted to be alone. He just had no idea that the way he was being made to live was lonely until it was already too late. Long before he gets that far, though, the show shows us his birth from another angle. In the lemon people he eventually creates to populate his castle. They are made by him using whatever process he half remembers from his own making, and they are even more fragile than he is. They break, they leak, they die quickly. Lemongrab is, in the language the show uses elsewhere about Bubblegum, their creator, and he is, by every measure, a worse parent than she ever was. But you can see, if you look carefully, that he is trying to copy her. He is doing what she did to him, only with even less skill and even less care, because the example he was given was already a poor one. This is the loop the tragedy of Lemongrab keeps closing. He was hurt by the way he was made. The way he was made is the only model he has. So he hurts the people he makes, and the people he makes scream in the same key he screams in, and nobody in his castle ever really knew anything but pain. It is a closed system. Bubblegum walks past the gates of it from time to time and notices that things are not going well, and walks on. The show does not let her off the hook for this, even though it is very gentle about how it shows the indictment. Before any of that, in the very first episode he is ever in, the show is already laying the foundations of every later sadness. The first moments of Lemongrab's life are spent being told that he has been brought out of the chamber to do a job. He is not told he is loved, he is not told he is welcome. He is told to manage. The throne is described to him in plain terms. He is given a list of duties, and then the camera lingers on him for a second too long, on his startled face, on his very wide eyes, on the slight tremor in his hands. And you can see, if you let yourself, that he is terrified. He has just been born. He does not know what any of this is, and he is already instantly in over his head. That terror is the engine of his whole life. Every scream he makes from that moment forward is in some way the same scream. The scream of somebody who has been switched on inside a story he never agreed to be in, and who is being asked to play a role he was not made well enough to play, and who has no language available to him but volume. The genius of Adventure Time's writing here is that it keeps that scream funny on the surface, and tragic underneath, at the exact same time for years. We are going to keep coming back to him, episode by episode, and watch the show fill out the picture. By the time we are done, you will, I hope, see him a little less as a punchline and a little more as what he is. A person who was built and abandoned and asked to rule and never given the tools to do any of it. A boy in the body of an earl. A failed experiment that the show, very quietly, refuses to let you write off. The first episode that contains Lemongrab is the same one that contains his entire backstory and his entire ruin pulled together. It is a small, almost domestic story on the surface. Bubblegum has a problem. She has been turned into a teenager. She needs somebody to mind the throne while she sorts the problem out. She goes to the laboratory, opens up the chamber, and out comes Lemongrab. The rest of the episode is, in narrative terms, just the new regent walking around inspecting the kingdom he has just been handed. with Finn and Jake trying to manage him and Bubblegum trying to undo the experiment that left her unable to manage him herself. On paper, it is a half hour of children's television about an awkward houseguest. In practice, it is the foundational document of one of the saddest character arcs the show ever wrote. You can feel the unease starting the second he steps out of the chamber. His body language is wrong. He moves the way somebody moves when they do not yet know how their joints are supposed to work. He stares, he smells things, he overreacts to noise. He focuses very intensely on small details that nobody else can see the point of. And his voice the moment he uses it is unlike anything in the candy world. It rasps, it cracks, it jumps up and down in volume with no warning. Whenever he is calm, you can tell he is forcing it. Whenever he is not calm, the entire kingdom can hear him. The episode does a small but important thing very early on, when it shows you Lemongrab being formally introduced to the Candy People as their temporary ruler. Finn and Jake are there as the closest thing to a friendly presence around. The Candy People gather in something resembling a town square, and Lemongrab gives a speech that the show plays for nervous laughter, but that if you read it carefully is the speech of a person who has been alive for less than an hour. He uses big words. He talks about laws, he talks about punishments. He has, somehow, an entire administrative vocabulary already loaded into his head, but no instinct at all for how to talk to a person. He is reading from a script that was written into him by Bubblegum's machinery, and he is reading it without any understanding of what any of it is supposed to feel like. There is something especially sad about this if you sit with it. Imagine waking up for the very first time, fully formed, already in front of an audience. Imagine being expected to be authoritative the instant you exist. Imagine that the only words you have access to are the words that were stamped into you in the factory, the words a princess thought a regent ought to know. You have nothing else. You have no childhood memories. You have no language for fear or for confusion, or for the feeling of being looked at by strangers. You have law, and you have punishments, and you have unacceptable. So when something happens that you cannot process, the only word you can reach for is the one you came with, unacceptable. And so that is what you say. The Candy People, for their part, are not equipped to receive him with any patience. They are children, more or less, and a frightening adult has just been put in charge of them. The earliest scenes of him in the kingdom are scenes of mass anxiety. He raises his voice, they cry, he tries to enforce a rule, they run. He becomes confused by their confusion. They become more afraid of his confusion. This is the loop the rest of his life will run inside. Adventure Time very gently sets it up in the first 10 minutes of his very first episode, and then leaves it ticking for years. The episode escalates when he tries to enforce a punishment on Finn and Jake. He has decided in his own internal sense of order that a rule has been broken. The rule may or may not be a real one. The punishment he reaches for is extreme. He famously hands out a sentence of 1,000,000 years in the dungeon, which is the kind of number a small child reaches for when they want to say a very big number. Only the small child happens to also be the legal authority of the kingdom. The show plays this for laughs, and it is funny, but it is also, very precisely, a portrait of somebody who has not yet learned what proportionality is, being given the power to enforce any sentence he likes. He has no internal volume control on punishment, in the same way he has no internal volume control on his voice. Anything that feels bad to him gets the maximum response available. Anything that hurts gets 1,000,000 years in the dungeon, because 1,000,000 is the largest number he can think of. And the dungeon is the worst place he knows. Finn and Jake escape, of course. They escape, and they go to find Bubblegum, who is in the middle of trying to age herself back up. And from the moment they leave him, you can read the rest of the Lemongrab story in microcosm. He is alone in the kingdom. He has been given absolute authority. The first thing the people he is in charge of do, when they get the chance, is run away. The first thing the people closest to him do, when they get the chance, is leave him behind to go solve a problem that does not include him. The kingdom is held together with him in nominal control, but everybody in the building is, at minimum, hiding from him. He has been a person in this story for less than a day, and he is already alone in the way that defines the rest of his life. There is a very small detail in this first episode that I keep coming back to. The show shows you Lemongrab by himself in the castle after Finn and Jake have left, and gives him a moment to be still. He is not in a scene with anybody. The camera just watches him try to inhabit the place he has been put in charge of. He paces, he looks at things, he tries on the throne, he looks out the window at the kingdom he has been told is his. And the way the show animates him in that little stretch before the next plot beat takes over is not the way it animates a comedic monster. It is the way it animates a small, confused person who has not yet learned what loneliness is, but who is already feeling it and does not have any words for it. The volume is down. The screaming is off. And what is left is just a creature who does not know what to do with himself. That, more than any of the famous outbursts, is the image of Lemongrab the show keeps quietly returning to. The screaming is the surface texture of the character. The thing under the screaming, in every scene the show ever puts him in, is that pose. The pose of an entity that has been switched on and left to figure out what it is, by itself, in a building that is not his. The episode ends, eventually, with Bubblegum restored to her full age, and the throne back in her hands, and Lemongrab sent away to his own kingdom on the outskirts of the Candylands. The show treats this as a kind of resolution. Bubblegum is back. The candy people are safe. The crisis is over. And structurally, that is what the episode wants you to feel. It wants you to laugh at the awkwardness, breathe a sigh of relief that the strange regent is gone, and move on. The conclusion the surface plot wants you to draw is that Lemongrab was a problem, and that problem is now somewhere else where it can no longer disturb the main story. The problem is that the show, behind the surface plot, has just shown you the actual ending of his life. He is being sent away. He is being put on the edge of the map. He is being given a castle to be alone in, with citizens he will have to make himself if he wants company. The thing Bubblegum chooses, when she has a chance to take responsibility for him, is to give him a kingdom of his own at the far edge of hers, and then to let geography do the work of keeping him out of her sight. He was made to be useful. He has stopped being useful, so he is removed, not killed, not in the show's language, abandoned outright, just placed at a distance where she does not have to look at him. If you are inclined to read Adventure Time charitably, and most viewers are, you can hear that decision as a practical one. Bubblegum is overwhelmed. The kingdom needs ordinary management. Lemongrab needs a place where he can exist without panicking the candy people. Giving him his own castle is, in some sense, the most generous outcome available. But the show keeps coming back season after season, and showing you what that castle has actually become. And what it has become is not a refuge. It is a closed prison ruled by an unwell god. And Bubblegum, who made the god, only visits when she absolutely has to. The Too Young episode is therefore the foundational document of his story, but only in retrospect. At the time of airing, it is presented as a one-off comic bit about a regent who does not work out. Watching it after everything that comes later, you can feel the foreshadowing in every shot. The wide eyes, the shaking, the way he tries to be useful and is told almost immediately that he is not. The way he is given a building and then left to fend for himself. The way Bubblegum, the closest thing he has to a parent, never asks him how he is doing. The way the show frames his exit as a relief, with the unspoken implication that the relief is for everybody except him. A lot of what is so interesting about Adventure Time as a series is that it trusts its child audience to feel things long before it asks them to articulate why. The Too Young episode does this. It does not stop and explain to you that what is happening to Lemongrab is sad. It does not put the words in anybody's mouth. It just keeps the camera on him for slightly too long and lets you feel it. Kids who watched this episode when it aired remember being unsettled by him in a way they could not name. Years later, after enough rewatches, they often come back to that first episode and find themselves on his side. The thing that was unsettling is the thing that is sad. The screaming is the surface. The fact that he is screaming because nobody ever showed him another way to be is the substance. By the end of his first appearance, the show has set every piece in motion. He has been born, he has been judged, he has been removed, he has been given a kingdom. He has not been loved, he has not been taught, he has not been helped. And from this point on, every time the camera goes back to him, the question the show is asking is the same. What does a person become when they were made the way he was made, and then left alone with what they were made into? The answer the show gives, in episode after episode, is the actual tragedy. It is worth stopping for a while on the scream itself, because so much of how the world receives Lemongrab is shaped by it. In any clip of him, in any conversation people have about him, in any compilation, the scream is what comes first. The voice is the brand. Unacceptable, the way he says it is one of the most recognizable line readings in 21st century animation. People who have never watched a single episode of Adventure Time know the voice. They know the cadence, they know the way the word breaks in his throat. The reason I want to slow down on it is that the show, very carefully, does not let the scream be the joke for very long. It starts out as a joke. The first time you hear it, it is funny in the same way that any extreme reaction to a small thing is funny. It is the kind of voice that makes you laugh because it is so disproportionate to the situation it is responding to. But the show then keeps using it in situations where laughter would be wrong, and the texture of the voice changes around you. By the time you have heard him scream 3 or 4 episodes in, the word unacceptable is no longer a line. It is a symptom. If you actually listen to him, the scream has a shape. It tends to begin with a clenched throat it tends to break at exactly the wrong moment into a wheeze. There is almost always a tremor inside it. You can hear under the volume that the volume is not something he is doing on purpose. It is what happens when he tries to speak. He raises his voice the way somebody else might shiver. It is reflexive. He cannot help it. The show keeps showing you scenes where he tries briefly to be quiet and you can see him struggle and then lose and then the scream comes back. It is not a performance. It is, in the show's terms, who he is. This matters because so much of how we react to people in the real world depends on how we read the volume of their voice. We code loudness as aggression. We code shouting as bullying. We code restraint as politeness. The first thing we feel about Lemongrab on a gut level is that he is being aggressive. He is being rude. He is making demands. He is hard to be around. And these are the things the candy people feel about him too. And the things Bubblegum feels about him. And the things Finn and Jake feel about him. He is read immediately as a difficult creature because he is loud. And by the time anybody could sit with him long enough to notice that the loudness is not an act of will, but a property of his body, they have already decided they do not want to be near him. The word unacceptable is also worth turning over for a moment. Adventure Time could have given him any catchphrase. The choice of unacceptable of all the words available is a precise piece of writing. It is not an expression of feeling. It is a verdict. It is a word a court might use about a contract, a word a parent might use about a child's behavior, a word a regulator might use about a building's safety. It is, in every register, a word that comes down from above, from somebody who is allowed to judge. Lemongrab uses it constantly, on everybody, about everything. The lemon people are unacceptable. The candy people are unacceptable. Finn and Jake are unacceptable. Even in some scenes, his own decisions are unacceptable. The thing the show implies by giving him this word is that he has internalized judgment as his first language. Everything is being measured against a standard, all the time, in his head. And nothing is meeting the standard. He himself is not meeting the standard. The thing he is screaming at more than anything else is the gap between what is in front of him and what he has been programmed to expect. He has a sense of order he can never quite reach. He has a sense of duty he can never quite perform. He has a sense of what a regent should be that is so far above what he actually is that every act of judgment he makes lands at maximum severity. Unacceptable, the way he says it, is the verdict that fits everything in his field of vision, including himself. You can read that as a portrait of perfectionism, which is one of the readings the fan community has gravitated to over the years. He is, in this reading, a creature who was made to a high specification and is constantly aware that he is not meeting it. The specification is unreachable, so everything fails. Every breath he takes is a failure to be the regent he was made to be. Every word he says is a failure to be calm. Every interaction with another candy citizen is a failure to be liked. And he was given, by Bubblegum's programming, no vocabulary for the experience of failure other than the verdict that failure deserves. Unacceptable. The other reading, which sits next to that one, is that he is mirroring the way the world has spoken to him. Bubblegum's voice, the first voice he ever heard, is the voice of somebody managing him, telling him what to do, telling him how to be. From the very first second of his life, he was being given instructions, and the instructions were not really negotiable. They were given to him with the implicit understanding that not meeting them would be a failure. And so when he turns and faces the rest of the world, he picks up the same voice. He becomes, in the only language he was taught, the manager. He hands down verdicts, he gives instructions, he measures. He calls things unacceptable because that is how the world spoke to him first. There is a really small detail that I think is worth lingering on. In the show, when Lemongrab is on his own, with no audience, in a quiet room, the screaming sometimes stops. It does not always stop, but there are moments, especially in some of the later episodes, where he is allowed by the camera to be still and silent for a beat. He sits, he looks at something, he breathes, the voice goes quiet. And you start to feel, in those quiet beats, the cost of the volume. The screaming is not free. It exhausts him. He has to come down from it. He has to recover, and in the quiet moments between the outbursts, the show shows you what the cost of being him actually feels like. He is tired. He has always been tired. He has spent his whole life shouting at a world he was not equipped to live in, and it has worn him out. The other thing the show does, almost as a recurring motif, is hand Lemongrab music. He sings in moments. He plays an instrument. There are stretches of episodes where the screaming gives way to a melody, and the melody every time is gentle. The voice that came out of him as a scream comes out as a song, and it is a softer voice than you ever thought he had. The implication of this is one of the most quietly devastating ideas in the show. He always had a softer voice available. He just never had a context that let him use it. When the show gives him a song, what it is really giving him is permission to sound like the person he might have been if his early life had been different. I think a lot about the fact that when he sings, nobody in the kingdom is listening. The lemon people, on the whole, do not get to hear it. Bubblegum, who designed him, does not get to hear it. The candy people do not get to hear it. The show gives the songs to us, the audience, and to a few small witnesses inside the story. The songs are a private thing. They are what is left of him underneath the regent he was made to be. And the show, very gently, suggests that there is a great deal of him underneath the regent. There is a person down there. There is a voice down there. There is music. There is care. But you only ever hear it when nobody else is around. So when you go back to the screaming, after sitting with the singing, the screaming becomes something else. It becomes a kind of protective layer. The voice he uses with the world is the voice he has to use to survive being in the world. The voice he uses by himself, in the quiet, is the voice he actually has. The tragedy is that the world only knows the loud one. Everybody who meets him meets the regent. Almost nobody meets the person underneath. And eventually, after enough years of nobody hearing the quiet voice starts to feel, even to him, like a part of himself he is not allowed to use. The screaming wins. The song fades. The scream becomes the whole personality. And by the time you start to notice this is happening to him, it is already very far along. There is one more thing I want to say about the word before we move on. The word unacceptable in Lemongrab's mouth is the word of a creature who has been told he is unacceptable by the only person who could have decided otherwise. Bubblegum made him. Bubblegum looked at him. Bubblegum decided he was not what she wanted. She did not put him back in the chamber. She did not, in fact, do anything cruel in the standard sense, but she sent him away. And the message of that sending is the same message he then carries with him for the rest of his life. He is, by her standard, not what he should have been. He is, by her standard, unacceptable. And he then carries that judgment out into the world and applies it to everybody he meets, because he was made by somebody who applied it to him. This is the deepest level of the scream. He learned the word from the people who used it on him. The kingdom he eventually rules is a kingdom where the word he was taught is the law. Anybody who steps inside Castle Lemongrab is being judged by the standard he was judged by, and the standard is unmeetable, and the verdict is the same verdict every time. And nobody in the castle ever gets to find out what the song underneath the verdict actually sounds like. After his first appearance, Lemongrab disappears from the show for a long stretch. The Candy Kingdom carries on. Finn and Jake go off on other adventures. Bubblegum gets older again. The kingdom settles back into its rhythm. And out at the edge of the Candylands, in a castle nobody visits, the Earl of Lemongrab continues to exist. The show stops checking on him, but he does not stop being there. When he comes back, in a season 4 episode called You Made Me, the picture has changed in a way that, again, the show does not announce. He has been alone. He has been alone for a long time. He is the Earl of a kingdom that is empty. There is a castle. There is a throne. There is a regent. There are no subjects. Nobody is there. The show does not explain how it ended up this way, but it shows you in the opening minutes what he has been doing in the meantime. He has been sitting in his castle. He has been pacing his hallways. He has been administering nothing. The premise of the episode is that he goes to Bubblegum in person and asks her for help. He is alone. He cannot bear it anymore. He needs somebody. He does not at first know how to say what he needs. He uses the same word. He uses the same volume. He tells her that the situation in his castle is unacceptable, but under the volume, when you watch closely, the request he is actually making is a child's request. He is asking, in the only voice he has, for somebody to come and live with him. He has been by himself in a building for years, and he is no longer able to pretend that this is fine. Bubblegum's response to this is a response of somebody who is busy. She does not say no. She does not, in fairness, dismiss him entirely. She works out a solution. She offers to use her laboratory to make him a companion. The idea is that he will have somebody to be around. The idea is that he will not be alone anymore. The idea is, on the surface, generous. And on the surface, the way Bubblegum frames it, she is doing him a favor. But you have to slow down here, because what she is actually doing is offering to make him a brother, not a partner, not a peer, a duplicate. Another Lemongrab, grown the same way, in the same chamber, with the same voice, the same body, the same set of expectations, and the same limited vocabulary. She is offering to copy him. The solution to the problem of Lemongrab being alone is, in Bubblegum's hands, more Lemongrab. It is not a wider world. It is not a teacher. It is not a healer. It is not somebody soft. It is another version of him, made in his image, made in her image of him. This is one of the most quietly cruel things she does in the entire show, and the show does not make a meal of it. It does not stop and have a character explain why this is a bad solution. It does not put the moral into anybody's mouth. It just shows you what happens next. She makes him a brother. The brother walks out of the chamber, exactly as he did, with the same voice, the same wide eyes, the same shaking hands. And the show does not give you a chance to feel relieved before it cuts to the next thing. The thing it cuts to is one of the only moments of pure happiness Lemongrab has ever given. He goes home with his brother. They walk together, they look at the kingdom, he shows the brother the castle, he shows him the throne, he shows him the dining hall. They sit and eat together, they play music, they sing, and their voices in a duet are gentler than either voice is on its own. They sleep in the same room. They wake up in the same room. The episode lets this go on in the middle of all the screaming for an unexpectedly long time. And what it is showing you in that stretch is something close to a family. What is so quietly devastating about this stretch is that Lemongrab, given a companion, becomes a different person. He is calmer. He is gentler. He smiles properly for the first time since the show introduced him. The voice softens. The verdicts ease off. He does not stop being who he is, but he stops being trapped by who he is because somebody is there with him, somebody he can recognize, somebody who recognizes him back. The screaming for a while is not necessary because there is no gap between him and the person he is talking to. They speak the same language, they have the same body, they were made the same way. They understand each other. And the show makes the point very gently that all he ever needed was this. He did not need a kingdom. He did not need a million years of dungeon time. He needed somebody to be in the same room with him. He needed somebody to share his life with. The screaming was always, on some level, a sign that he was screaming because there was nobody to listen to him at a normal volume. Give him a listener, and the volume comes down. The thing that everybody assumed was a personality turns out to be a wound, and the wound, when it is treated, heals very fast. That is what makes what happens next so painful. Lemongrab and his brother, Lemongrab 2, settle into something like a life. The show does not give them very long. It introduces, almost immediately, a problem. The brother, the duplicate, is unstable in a way Lemongrab himself is not. He is fragile. He breaks easily. There is a sense throughout the second half of the episode that the Lemon Chamber, the second time around, did not produce somebody who could last. He is sick in some way the show does not name. He is weaker than his brother. And the show plants this very carefully, so that the eventual collapse of the relationship can land in a particular way. There is a meal scene which becomes important later. The two of them sit and eat. They share food, they share a table. The episode in the moment plays it as warmth, as togetherness. They are eating like brothers. They are dining like family. The show lingers on it. The brothers are happy. The kingdom, for the first time, has somebody in it apart from the regent. And the regent, for the first time, looks like he might be able to live in his own castle. The implication of the scene is that this is the future. They will eat together every day. They will sing together. They will rule together. They will share the burden of the kingdom they were both made to administer. And then the show, very quietly, sets up the betrayal that will define everything that comes after. The brother is sick. The brother needs care. The brother is fragile. And Lemongrab on his own, with no parent and no teacher and no model, has no idea how to give care to somebody else. He has the impulse, he has the wish, he has the feeling, but he does not have the skill. And the question that the next few episodes will pose, in the most unbearable way, is what happens when a person whose only model of love is the abandonment he was given tries to love somebody he is responsible for, and does not know how. You Made Me ends, as far as the surface plot goes, with the two of them together. They have a brother now. They have each other. The screaming is reduced. The kingdom feels less empty. The episode is, by Adventure Time standards, a small piece of good news. And by Adventure Time standards, that is almost never how things actually end. The show is putting a piece on the board. It is not closing a chapter, it is opening one. The most important line of the episode, in interpretive terms, is the title, You Made Me. The thing that brothers say to each other, the thing lemon people will eventually say to all of them, You made me. The whole moral architecture of the Lemongrab arc rests on those three words. The question of who is responsible for who, the question of what you owe a creature you have brought into existence, the question of what counts as care after the act of making, the question ultimately of whether love is what produces a creature, or what comes after a creature has been produced. Bubblegum in this episode makes a person and then walks away. Lemongrab in this episode is given a brother and tries to keep him. The show puts the two parental models next to each other and lets you draw the line. One is the model of the creator who builds and abandons. The other is the model of the creature who, having been built, refuses to abandon his own creation in turn. The fact that the second model fails just as badly as the first is, in the show's deepest sense, the indictment. They both fail. The difference is that one of them is trying. For a few quiet minutes at the end of You Made Me, you might be allowed to feel hopeful for Lemongrab. He has a brother. He has a companion. He has a voice to sing with. He has a kingdom that feels, for the first time, like a home. The trick the show is playing on you, very gently, is that it wants you to feel that hope precisely so that what comes next will land harder. The next time we see the castle, the brother will be in trouble. The next time after that, the brother will be gone. And the trace of the brother in Lemongrab's body, in his voice, in his behavior, will be the engine that drives him into the worst version of himself he ever becomes. But for now, just sit with the duet. Two voices, the same voice, calmer than either of them has ever been on its own in a castle nobody else visits. Lemongrab is, for one brief stretch of his life, not alone. And the show wants you to remember that, because the rest of his story is about what happens when he is, again. The next time Adventure Time takes you back to the castle on the edge of the Candylands, the castle is not empty anymore. There are subjects in it. The brothers, in the time the show has not been watching them, have done what Bubblegum did to them. They have made a population. The chamber that produced them has been used again and again and again until the kingdom is full of small, fragile, sour creatures who all look more or less alike, who all speak in some version of the same voice, who all live under the rule of two Lemongrabs who do not really know how to be in charge of anybody. This is the situation when, in a later episode called All Your Fault, Bubblegum sends Finn and Jake to the Lemon Kingdom on what looks, on the surface, like a routine errand. A letter has arrived from Castle Lemongrab. The Earls have written that their fiefdom is going hungry. Bubblegum's response is administrative. She prepares a bag of candy seeds, the kind of seeds that can be planted and grown into food, and she hands the bag to her two most reliable couriers. Finn and Jake are dispatched in her place. The show treats the trip, on the surface, as a small detour. The princess stays in her castle. The boys go on the errand. The episode begins as if nothing especially terrible is going to happen. What they find when they get there is the central horror of the entire Lemongrab arc. The castle, from the outside, looks intact. The hallways are decorated. The throne is in its place. There is a sense, when you first step inside, that an attempt has been made to make this look like a functioning kingdom. But the longer the camera lingers, the more wrong everything looks. The lemon people are sick, not metaphorically. Literally, their bodies are misshapen, their skin is leaking, they limp, they stare. They make small noises that are not language. They are dying, very slowly, in front of you, and the show does not soften this. The two brothers presiding over all of this are not aware of how wrong it has become. The thing the show is doing, in the way it shows them, is letting you see that they are still trying. They are still trying to administer. They are still trying to feed their subjects. They are still trying to hold the kingdom together. But their understanding of what care is, of what nourishment is, of what a healthy population looks like, is so shallow that everything they try in the attempt to take care of their citizens makes things worse. They are not running a torture chamber on purpose. They are running, in the only way they know how, a kingdom. And the kingdom is killing the people who live in it. There is one specific image from this episode that I think defines a lot of how viewers feel about Lemongrab for the rest of the series. The lemon children, the small malformed citizens. The kingdom is producing more of them than it can sustain, and the existing ones are not being kept well. And you can see in the body language of the brothers that they do not really understand why this is happening. They keep doing what they have been doing. They keep applying the rules. They keep using the same word, unacceptable, on everything that does not fit, including their own people. And the people, by every measure, are not fitting. The kingdom is, by their own standard, an unacceptable kingdom, and they have no idea how to make it any other way. When the candy seeds finally arrive, the brothers do not use them as seeds. They take Bubblegum's secret of how to turn raw ingredients into living creatures. The secret they were never meant to learn, and they pour it onto the bag. The seeds, which were supposed to be a solution to the famine, become another writhing, vomiting creature. The only meal the kingdom had been promised is turned, in the brothers' hands, into another mouth to feed. The episode, in that one moment, condenses the whole tragedy of how the brothers were raised. Every gift that arrives in their hands is converted, by the only instinct they have, into more of the disaster they are already inside. What gives the episode its weight is that the message of the kingdom, in the end, does reach Bubblegum. Finn and Jake come back. The truth of what has happened to her experiment finds its way home, and the show, very carefully, refuses to give her a confession. She does not say she is sorry. She does not promise to do better. She does the practical, kingly thing. She manages the immediate crisis. She arranges for the worst of the damage to be contained. She arranges for Lemongrab to keep going, somehow, in spite of what he has done and in spite of what she did to set the stage for it. There is an enormous amount of weight in the title of this episode, All Your Fault. The phrase, in the context of the story, is something the Lemon people, in one way or another, say back to Lemongrab. He has made them. They have been broken by the making, and they tell him, in the only voice they have, that the suffering they are in is his responsibility. The show makes you feel the truth of that. He is, in the most direct sense, their creator. He brought them into existence. He has not been a good parent to them. He has been a bad one. He has been bad in many of the same ways Bubblegum was bad to him, and he has been bad in some additional ways of his own. And the phrase, when they say it back to him, is exactly the phrase that should also be said one floor higher up to Bubblegum. This is one of the central pieces of Adventure Time's moral architecture, and the Lemongrab arc is the place where it gets stated most plainly. Responsibility in this universe travels through making. You are responsible for what you make. Bubblegum is responsible for Lemongrab. Lemongrab is responsible for his brother. Lemongrab and his brother are responsible for the Lemon people. The buck does not stop. It keeps traveling backwards, all the way up the chain, into Bubblegum's laboratory, into the original choice to use a chamber to produce a person to hold a throne. The whole line of suffering can be traced link by link back to that choice. And the show, very carefully, refuses to let any of the links pretend the choice was not made. What makes this stretch of the story so devastating is that the brothers, in the middle of all this, are still trying to be regents. They greet visitors with as much warmth as they can manage. They show off the kingdom. They are proud of what they have built. They believe in their own internal sense of order that what they have done is impressive. They have rooms, they have decor, they have a hall for guests. They have, they think, the trappings of a real kingdom. The fact that the citizens of the kingdom are dying in the hallways does not register to them as a sign that anything has gone wrong. They have, by the standards their mother gave them, done well. Their mother programmed them with a sense of administrative order, and they have followed it. The order is full. The administration is in place. The citizens, well, the citizens are the citizens. You can feel, watching this, how badly Bubblegum has failed them. She gave them the trappings of governance without any of the substance. She gave them a vocabulary for law without any vocabulary for care. She gave them, in the only programming they had access to, the wrong moral instincts. They were taught that the kingdom should look a certain way. They were not taught that the people in the kingdom should feel a certain way. They were taught that order was the metric. They were not taught that pain was a metric. And by the time you can see this, in the architecture of their castle, in the body language of their lemon subjects, it is clearly too late to give them a different moral education. They are who they are. They are doing what they were taught. The show in this episode does an interesting thing with Finn. Finn, who is the audience surrogate in many of these stories, is horrified. He cannot believe what he is seeing. He keeps wanting to do something. He keeps wanting to fix it. He keeps wanting to take the Lemon people away, hide them from the brothers, bring them somewhere they can be cared for properly. The show lets him try. The show, in the end, lets the Candy Kingdom absorb some of the suffering. But the show also lets him understand, by the end of the episode, that the problem is structural. It is not going to be fixed by removing the worst citizens. The kingdom itself is broken. The kingdom itself is a closed system of pain, and the only way to actually fix it would be to take it apart, which Bubblegum will not do, because she will not admit that the experiment all the way back at its origin was wrong. I want to slow down on one more aspect of this episode, because it is one of the show's most quietly damning beats. The brothers, throughout the visit, are excited that anybody from the Candy Kingdom has come. They want approval. They want to be told that what they have done is good. They show off the castle the way a child shows a parent a school project. They want it admired. They want, more than anything else, to be told that they have done well. And the visitors, through the whole trip, cannot say it. The kingdom is not good. The work is not good. The brothers have failed at the only job they were ever given. And the visitors, in their own internal moral systems, cannot lie to them about it. But nobody in this stretch stops them. Nobody takes the kingdom away. Nobody appoints a new regent. Nobody removes the citizens for their own sake. The system does the smaller thing, the cleaner thing, the thing that does not require admitting the experiment was a failure. The visitors leave. The brothers, after they go, return to running the kingdom in the only way they know how. The visit changes nothing structural. It just leaves a small wound in everybody involved, which the show then carries forward into the next episode and uses as fuel. This is the version of Lemongrab that lives in most viewers' memories. Not the regent, not the screamer. The earl of a sick kingdom, presiding over a population that is suffering because of him, going through the motions of administration with no idea that the motions are killing the people he is administering. He is not a comic figure here. He is not exactly a villain. He is a creature in over his head doing what he was taught, who has been put in charge of more lives than he was ever equipped to hold. And the show keeps you in that castle long enough that you can no longer pretend you do not understand what he is. Before we move into the worst things he does, I want to spend some time on the kinds of small cruelties that line the path to them, because the show is very careful to walk you there step by step. The big moment, when it arrives, does not arrive out of nothing. The show plants all the way back in the earliest episodes, the small habits that will eventually grow into the unforgivable ones. Lemongrab does not become a monster in one episode. He is being assembled into one, by his environment and by his own behavior every time you see him. The earliest version of this is in his very first appearance. There is a small moment, often forgotten, where he tries something. He puts something in his mouth that nobody else expects him to put in his mouth. The show plays it as a strange thing that the strange Earl does. It is intended to make you uneasy, not horrified. He tastes, he bites, he tries things. He has, the show implies, a strange relationship with food, with bodies, with the boundary between what is part of him and what is part of somebody else. It is a small note. The show does not press on it, but it is planted in the soil of the character from the very first time you meet him. You can read this as another consequence of how he was made. He is, in literal terms, food. He is a citizen of a kingdom where everybody is made of candy. His own body is made of lemon. Everything around him, in his original kingdom and in his own kingdom, is edible. The boundary between body and food in the candy kingdom is permeable in a way it would not be in a human world. The candy people eat candy. The candy people are made of candy. Bubblegum in some episodes has had pieces of herself taken or remade. The body is, in this universe, a substance like any other. A thing you can change, a thing you can taste, a thing you can absorb. That is the world Lemongrab is born into, and he absorbs the logic of it very literally. He sees no clear line between the citizens of his kingdom and the food he eats. When the kingdom is hungry, the kingdom can become food. When somebody offends him, somebody can become food. He does not at first do this often. He does not at first do it deliberately. But the impulse is there, very early, and the show keeps showing you it. He bites the air around him. He bites people in greeting. He licks, he sniffs, he treats the world as a collection of substances to be evaluated by mouth. There is a deeply uncomfortable beat in his first encounter with Finn and Jake, where this is foregrounded. The show plays it small. He bites Jake, he takes a small piece, he treats it for a second as if this were a kind of legal proceeding. He is in his head evaluating something. He is in his head performing a kind of regent function. And Finn and Jake respond with horror, and the show treats their horror as the correct response. And yet, underneath the horror, you can see the structure that produces the bite. He does not, in his world, have a clear sense of where the line is. He has been told he is in charge. He has been told the citizens are his to manage. He has been told to use his judgment. He has not been told that biting somebody is, by the standards of every culture except his own, an unacceptable thing to do. So you can already see in his first episode the logic that will eventually let him do worse things. The logic is that the kingdom is his. The kingdom includes his citizens. His citizens are made of substance. Substance can be evaluated by mouth. Therefore, he can, when he wants to, taste his subjects. The show, of course, does not write this argument out. It does not want you to do the math out loud. It just shows you the behavior very early and then keeps the behavior in the background until you are ready to see what it grows into. The grown version of the behavior is the cruelty he eventually visits on his own people. The lemon people, in the kingdom he eventually builds, are not just citizens. They are also, in his head, things he can taste. He can sample them. He can evaluate them. He can decide which ones are functioning correctly and which ones are not. He has in his head a quality control system. And in his quality control system, citizens who fail are in some sense defective product. He has the right, as their creator, to do what he likes with defective product. He has the right to repair them. He has the right to destroy them. He has the right, in the worst version of the story, to absorb them back into the materials they were made from. This is the structure that drives the next phase of the arc. He is not by his own standards doing anything monstrous. He is by his own standards administering the kingdom. He has been given the citizens. He has been given the right to make decisions. He is making decisions. The fact that the decisions by every standard outside his own head are unspeakable is not something his moral education prepared him to notice. He was not given the kind of moral education that prepares you for that. He was given a vocabulary for law and order. He was given a vocabulary for verdicts. He was not given a vocabulary for the inherent dignity of a body other than his own. And so the cruelty arrives in the show by degrees. The biting becomes tasting. The tasting becomes sampling. The sampling becomes a habit. The habit becomes a routine. The routine becomes a system. And by the time the show shows you what the system has become, the system is so far advanced that the kingdom cannot really be salvaged from it. There are lemon people who have, by the time of the worst episodes, been broken down, or partly broken down, or are afraid every day of being broken down. They live under a regent who can, at any moment, decide that they are not functioning. They live under a regent whose mood determines whether they continue to exist. And he is the most powerful thing in their world. He made them. He can unmake them. What is so heartbreaking is that he is not, in his own internal experience, a tyrant. He does not, in any moment the show gives you access to, think of himself as cruel. He thinks of himself as a regent who is trying very hard to make the kingdom work. He thinks of himself as overworked. He thinks of himself as underappreciated. He thinks of his citizens as ungrateful. He thinks of his brother, when his brother is still there, as the only person who really understands. He has a story he is telling himself about his life. And the story does not include the suffering of the lemon people, because the lemon people are not, in the story, real people. They are subjects. They are inputs. They are, in the end, materials. This is the same logic, by the way, that Bubblegum applied to him, the way she made him, the way she treated him as material for a job. The logic he uses on his lemon people is the logic she used on him. He has very thoroughly internalized the model. He has done to others what was done to him. And he has, in the process, become a creature whose existence is hard to watch, because his cruelty is genuine. But it is also, in the structure the show is built around him, a cruelty he was given the tools for and given the permission for and given the model for by the person who made him in the first place. There is a kind of horror in this that the show wants you to feel slowly. It is not the loud horror of a monster who decides to harm. It is the quiet horror of a person who was raised wrong, in the strictest sense, and who is now using the only tools he has on the only people he has access to. The cruelty is real. The suffering is real. The kingdom is, by every measure, an awful place to live. And the person responsible for it is also somebody who was not given the chance to be anything other than what he is. The show keeps pulling at that tension. You are meant to be horrified by him. You are also meant, somewhere underneath the horror, to keep seeing the wide eyes from the chamber. You are meant to keep remembering that he was switched on into this. You are meant to keep remembering that the regent who is making the kingdom intolerable is also the child who was given the kingdom on the day of his birth. The show does not let either of those things cancel the other out. It holds them both all at once and asks you to hold them too. That holding is, in some ways, the central work the show is asking of you. To be in the room with a person who is doing terrible things, and to keep remembering, while he does them, that he was made this way. To refuse the easy moral comfort of writing him off as a villain. To refuse, also, the easy moral comfort of excusing him because he was hurt. He was hurt, and he is hurting other people. And both of those statements are true, and the show is asking you to keep them both alive in your mind for the rest of the arc. This is the prelude to the worst episode in his story. By the time we get there, the show has trained you very carefully to feel both of these things at once. You will see something terrible happen. You will, by the time it happens, understand exactly how he got to be the kind of creature who could do it. And the understanding will not make the act less terrible. It will make the act, if anything, worse, because the understanding will make it clear that nothing on the path was ever destined to come out any other way. He was always going to do this because of how he was made, and nobody, in all the time the show watched him, made a meaningful effort to interrupt the trajectory. The episode that breaks the kingdom is called Too Old, and you can hear, in the title, that the show knows what it is doing. The first episode was called Too Young. This one closes the bracket. It is a story about Lemongrab finally given the chance to be the regent he was always told he should be, becoming the worst version of himself the show has shown you yet, with the audience watching the trajectory he was put on snap closed. The setup is, on the surface, another routine visit. This time, it is Bubblegum and Finn who go back to the Lemon Kingdom on what is framed as a diplomatic dinner. Jake is not with them. Finn is in the middle of his own private heartbreak, in a stretch of the show where his last relationship has just ended badly, and the dinner is, partly, an excuse to keep him moving. The episode threads the personal plot through the political one in its first few minutes. What they find when they arrive is not what they were expecting. The kingdom has changed since the last time anybody from the Candy Court visited. The brothers have settled into something. The Lemon people have settled into something. The castle has a different mood. It does not feel on the surface as immediately broken as it did during the earlier visit. There is a hierarchy. There is an order. There is a routine. And the surface order, in the way the show shows it to you, is more frightening than the disarray was, because it has been built on top of something terrible. The brother, Lemongrab 2, is gentler than his older sibling. He always has been. In this episode, that gentleness is sharpened. He is the one who looks after the citizens. He is the one who tries to be kind. He is the one who, when the guests arrive, makes an effort to welcome them properly. He is, in the language the show uses around him, the conscience of the kingdom. Lemongrab is the regent. Lemongrab 2 is the heart. And the kingdom, in the time the show has not been watching, has reached an uneasy balance between the two of them. The regent makes the rules. The brother softens the rules. The citizens survive, day to day, in the gap between them. That balance you can feel the second the episode opens is not going to hold. The show plants the danger early. Lemongrab is hungry. The kingdom is, in some sense, the show does not spell out, in difficulty. Resources are short. Patience is short. The verdicts the regent passes have, in the time we have not been watching, gotten harsher. He is, on the day of the dinner, in a mood. The mood is a particular kind. It is the mood that he gets into when he is about to do something he will not be able to take back. The crisis of the episode, in the simplest possible terms, is that Lemongrab decides to absorb his brother. He does not call it that. He does not, in his own internal language, do it for that reason. He does it because he is, in some way, the show makes you feel rather than understand, jealous. He is afraid of being replaced. He is afraid that the kingdom prefers his brother. He is afraid that the citizens, given the choice, would rather be ruled by the gentle one. He is afraid that the gentle one is, in the eyes of any visitor, the better version of him. And the brother is, in every way that matters to the kingdom, the better version of him. Lemongrab knows this, and the show lets him sit with the knowledge until he cannot bear it. What the brother represents, in Lemongrab's head, is not a person. The brother is the thing that proves Lemongrab himself could have been better. The brother is the same recipe with a softer outcome. The brother is the proof that the chamber in different hands could have produced a regent who was capable of love. And the brother, just by existing, indicts him. Every time the brother is kind, Lemongrab is implicitly being told that he could have been kind. Every time the brother is patient, Lemongrab is being told that he could have been patient. Every time the brother sings, Lemongrab is being told that the song was always available to him, and he just never used it. There is a way of reading the absorption as a kind of denial. He cannot accept the brother as a separate person, because the brother as a separate person is unbearable. So he takes the brother in. He turns the brother into a part of himself. He makes the brother his own. In his own head, he is not killing his sibling. He tells himself, completing himself, he is taking the gentle version of him into the harsher version of him, so that the gentle version cannot, going forward, exist as something separate. There will only be one of them. The one that is left will be both of them. The kingdom, going forward, will only have one regent. And the regent will, in his head, be the better one, because he will, in his head, have absorbed the gentleness into himself and made it part of his own personality. The act itself, the show stages with extraordinary restraint. It does not gore it up. It does not make a horror set piece out of it. It is, in the way it is shot, almost domestic. It is, in some senses, quieter than the screaming has been. He takes his brother, he uses his body, he does what he does. And by the end of the scene, the brother is not there anymore, and Lemongrab is alone and the kingdom is alone. And the brother's voice going forward will only exist inside Lemongrab's head, as a memory that haunts him, or as a tone he uses sometimes when he sings. The show has, on occasion, been criticized for the act being too dark for its time slot. Defenders, including some of the people who worked on the show, have argued that the act is essential to the moral architecture of the kingdom, and that without it, the rest of the Lemonhope art does not land. Both views have a real basis. The act is, by any honest reading, one of the bleakest things any major children's animated show has put on screen. But the act is also, by any honest reading, the inevitable end of the trajectory the show has been carefully constructing since the first episode. The cannibal regent is the regent the show has been telling you Lemongrab was always going to become. What I want to draw your attention to, more than the act, is the silence after. The kingdom, after the brother is gone, is a different kingdom. The lemon people know. They cannot, in the language they have, always say what they know, but they know. They saw their gentle regent disappear, they saw the other regent grow, they have, in the brother's absence, lost the only buffer they had between them and the harsher version of being ruled by Lemongrab. They are, going forward, going to be ruled by the part of him that cannot soften. The brother was the soft part. The brother is now inside him. The brother is no longer available as a separate person to anybody but him. And Lemongrab, after the act, is changed. His body is different, he is larger, he is heavier. He is, in some way, the show shows you very precisely, not symmetrical anymore. He has taken something into himself, and the body has not fully integrated it. He moves differently. He sounds slightly different. The voice has, for the first time, an undertone of the brother's voice mixed into it. He has done the thing he set out to do. He is, in his own head, complete. And the show very carefully shows you that the completion has not made him happy. It has made him heavier, it has made him sadder. It has made him, in some sense, the show lets you feel rather than say, lonelier than he has ever been. There is a small beat in the immediate aftermath of the act where the kingdom holds its breath. Bubblegum and Finn are present. They are horrified. They want to do something. The show briefly lets them try, but the kingdom, in its own internal logic, does not seem to register the act as anything they can intervene on. The lemon people, on the whole, do not rise up. They do not run. They go on with their day. They have lived for years under a regent who has been moving in this direction. The act for them is the final stage of an arc they have been watching. They are, in some way, almost numb to it. They have lived inside the trajectory longer than the audience has, and they have on some level been preparing for this for a long time. And then, very quietly, the episode plants the next character. There is a child. There is a flute. There is a small lemon person who is different from the others, who has been hidden away, who is being kept safe. The kingdom, on top of everything else it has been hiding the only thing in it that still has a chance. The next phase of the story will be about that child. The show, having shown you the worst, then very gently turns and shows you the hope. The hope is, in the moment, almost unbearable, because the hope is so small, but it is there. And the show wants you to know it is there before the credits roll on the worst thing the kingdom has ever done. I think it is fair to say that Too Old is one of the most heartbreaking episodes of any Western animated series. It is heartbreaking in many directions at once. It is heartbreaking for the brother who was the one good thing in the kingdom and who is now gone. It is heartbreaking for Lemongrab, who has done the worst thing he will ever do, and who, by the end of the episode, has not become less alone, but more. It is heartbreaking for the lemon people, who have lost the only person in the kingdom who treated them well. It is heartbreaking for the show itself, which has trained you over years to care about Lemongrab and which now refuses to let you off the hook of caring about him, even after this. The work the show does after this episode is the work of asking you what you do with him next. He has done the thing he did. He cannot undo it. The kingdom is what it is. The brother is gone. The hope is hidden somewhere in the castle, waiting. And the regent, the one who is left, sits on his throne, larger and quieter and lonelier than he has ever been. And the show invites you to keep watching, knowing what you now know. The contract between the show and the audience, at this point in the arc, is very strange. The show has, in effect, shown you a terrible person, but a true person, and asked you to keep seeing him as a person. The show, in the next stretch of episodes, will not let you stop. The hope the show plants in the corner of that episode is a child. The child has a name, Lemonhope. The name is, on the surface, almost too on the nose. The kingdom is dying. The kingdom has a child. The child's name is Hope. The show is telling you, in the bluntest possible terms, where it is going. But the bluntness is part of the point. The kingdom has gotten to the place where the only word for the only good thing left in it has to be hope, because subtlety is not what the situation can afford anymore. There is one good thing left. The good thing's name is what it is. Lemonhope is, in the most literal sense, a lemon child. He looks like the other lemon people but smaller. He moves like the other lemon people but slighter. He has been hidden as far as fans have pieced together during the time the brother was still alive. The reading the arc supports is that the gentler of the two regents understood, on some level, that the kingdom would not be safe for a child like this if the older Lemongrab were allowed to shape him. The kingdom would, very predictably, try to grind him into the shape of every other citizen in the castle, and the child was different in a way somebody wanted to preserve. So he was kept out of sight. And by the time the older regent is alone, the child has been hidden long enough that he has not yet had the chance to be screamed at into compliance. That is what makes Lemonhope, in the moral arithmetic of the show, the kingdom's only chance. He is the one citizen who has not yet been broken by it. He has not yet had his voice shaped into the harsh voice. He has not yet had his body shaped into the bent shapes. He has not yet had his mind shaped into the language of verdicts. He is, somehow, still soft. He is still a child. He is still capable of music. And the show, very carefully, makes that capacity for music into the symbol of what the kingdom has cost everybody else. The first time you see Lemonhope properly, in his two-part story, he is playing a flute. He plays it with the same softness the brother had, and the same softness Lemongrab himself had when he was allowed to sing. It is, in some way, the same musical impulse that ran through both of them. The kingdom, all the way back at its origin, was full of music. The chamber that produced the brothers was, in some quiet sense, also producing music. The Lemon people, when they are not being broken by their lives, can sing. They can play. They have access to the same softness that Lemongrab and his brother have, sometimes, briefly, been allowed to use. The kingdom is full of music nobody is listening to. Lemonhope is the only resident the show gives the time to actually play it. The show, in giving him this gift, makes a particular kind of argument. Music in Adventure Time is almost always a place where characters tell the truth about themselves. Marceline sings what she cannot say. Finn writes songs about his feelings before he can name them. The Ice King writes terrible songs that, when you slow them down, are the most honest things about him. The show treats songs as the place where the underneath of the character comes up to the surface. Lemonhope, with his flute, is in that tradition. The flute is what he says with his life. The flute is the thing about him that he cannot stop being. Even when he is afraid, even when the kingdom is at its worst, even when the regent is closing in on him, the flute is still in his hands, and the music is still in his throat, and the song he is playing is the song of what the kingdom should have been all along. The plot the show builds around Lemonhope is, on the surface, a small adventure. He has to get out of the kingdom. There is a route, there is a guide, there is a series of obstacles, there is a journey, there is, eventually, a return. But underneath the surface plot, every beat is carrying the weight of the entire Lemongrab arc on its shoulders. The kingdom is going to live or die based on what this child does. Lemongrab the Regent is going to be redeemed or condemned based on what this child does. The audience is going to be allowed to forgive or made to mourn based on what this child does. The flute is the soundtrack of the entire moral test the show is setting up. The show, in introducing him, is also very gently rebalancing the moral camera. The Lemongrab arc, up to this point, has been about responsibility flowing downwards. Bubblegum makes Lemongrab. Lemongrab makes the Lemon people. The Lemon people suffer. The responsibility in the show's argument climbs back up the chain. With Lemonhope, the show adds a new question. What does the child, the one who has been made by all of the failed parents above him, owe in return? Does he owe the kingdom anything? Does he owe his maker anything? Does he have, by the simple fact of being the only person in the kingdom who can leave, an obligation to come back? That question, more than the journey, is the actual story of the next stretch of the show. The answer the show eventually offers, in its own quiet way, is complicated. It does not give Lemonhope an easy way out. It does not give him an easy way in. It gives him instead a slow walk through both possibilities, and lets him choose. And the show holds the choice in a kind of moral suspense for a long time, longer than you would expect a children's series to be allowed to do, before it finally lets him land. By the time he lands, the show has used him to ask, in the gentlest possible way, what we owe to the people who made us, especially when the people who made us did not themselves know how to give us what we needed. That is the question every viewer who comes back to this arc as an adult ends up sitting with. We have all, in some form, been made by people who did not know how to give us what we needed. We have all, in some form, been left with the question of what to do with that. Do we owe the makers our forgiveness? Do we owe them our presence? Do we owe them our help when they cannot help themselves? Do we owe them the parts of us that were broken in the making, returned as evidence? Lemonhope, in his small body, with his small flute, is the show's vessel for asking those questions out loud. There is a careful thing the show does, in setting him up, that I want to flag. He is, in the kingdom, the only one who can leave. The Lemon people, in their broken bodies, in their broken language, do not have the option. They cannot get out of the castle. They cannot, by their own strength, make the journey across the Candylands. They are stuck where they are, in the kingdom that is killing them, with the regent who is killing them. The child is the one with the legs to walk. The child is the one with the wind to play. The child is the one with the chance. That detail loads the rest of the story with a particular kind of weight. He is not going for himself, or not just for himself. He is going on behalf of everybody who cannot go. He is the only mouth in the kingdom that can speak for what is being done to it, because his mouth is the only one that has not been damaged by being inside it. And the kingdom, in some way it does not fully understand, has invested its last hope in him, not because he chose the role, but because he is the only one available to play it. He is, in the show's logic, a representative whose representativeness was thrust on him by the failure of everybody else. That makes the act of his leaving more complicated than it looks. To leave is to take with him the last voice that could speak the kingdom's pain. To leave is to leave the kingdom voiceless. To leave is, in some sense, to abandon the people he was hidden among. And to stay is to be ground down like everybody else in the kingdom's slow machine. The show holds both of those moral pressures on him at the same time, for as long as it can. There is no choice that is simply right. There is no choice that is simply free. There is only a series of partial obligations, and a child who has to walk through them with a flute in his hand. I want to land on one more thing about him before we move into his episodes properly. The show treats him as a child, not as a saint. He is not in every scene brave. He is not in every scene kind. He is, like any child, frightened sometimes, selfish sometimes, tired sometimes. He wants to live. He wants to be free. He wants, more than anything else, to play his music in a place where the air does not feel like the air in the castle. The show does not turn him into a symbol so completely that he stops being a person. He is a small lemon child with a flute, trying to figure out how to be alive in a kingdom that does not really know how to let anybody be alive. That is who he is. And the rest of his story is about what he does with that. The Lemonhope story is told across 2 episodes. They are in some ways the quietest pair of episodes in the entire Lemongrab arc. And they are the ones that do the most. The screaming, by the time we get to these episodes, has mostly been done. The regent is mostly elsewhere. The kingdom is mostly in the background. What you have, instead, is a child walking, and a child running, and a child being chased, and a child finding shelter, and a child playing music, and a child making a decision about whether to come back. The first episode is the escape. The child gets out of the castle. The escape is not, in the show's hands, a triumphant adventure. It is a frightened one. He runs because he has to. He runs because the regent has noticed him. He runs because the alternative to running is being absorbed into the kingdom in the way every other lemon person has been absorbed. The show stages the run not as a heroic sprint, but as a small, breathless flight across landscapes that are too big for him. He is a child. The candy lands are enormous. He is, at no point, comfortable. He is, at no point, safe. He finds on the way a guide. The guide is Flannel Boxing Day, a stranger to the kingdom, who takes the child in a quiet way and gives him a place to be while he figures out what comes next. The guide's hospitality is the first hospitality the show has ever shown you in this arc that is not laced with judgment. He does not interrogate the child. He does not ask the child to be useful. He does not give the child a role. He gives the child a chair. He gives the child a bed. He gives the child food. He gives the child time. And the time, in particular, is the thing the kingdom never gave any of its citizens. The child, for the first time in the show, has the time to sit and play his flute, without being watched, without being judged, without being absorbed. That stretch of the first part is, in some ways, the most important thing the entire arc does. It shows you what a healthy version of being looked after looks like. It does not announce that this is what it is doing. It does not say in dialogue that this is the model the kingdom should have used. It just shows you a person making room for a child to be himself. The child sits, the child plays, the child rests. The child is, for the first time, allowed to be a small person, not a citizen, not a subject, not a project, not an experiment. He is given the dignity of being left alone in the company of somebody who is paying attention to him without trying to fix him. The show invites you, gently, to feel the difference between this and the castle. And the difference, when you feel it, is the whole moral of the arc. The second part picks up later. The child has, in the time between the 2 episodes, started to settle. He has begun to feel safe. He has begun to learn what it might mean to have a life that is not the kingdom. And then the kingdom calls him back. It does not, in the show's terms, send an army. It does not, in the way a villain might in a different show, lay out a price. It just sends a request. The kingdom is in trouble. The kingdom needs him. The lemon people, who he left behind, are suffering. And the regent, who is the source of their suffering, is still there. And only Lemonhope, the only citizen who has ever been allowed to be a person, has the standing to do anything about it. The show, in setting this up, is making the moral question as clean as it can. Lemonhope owes the kingdom nothing. The kingdom did not raise him. The kingdom did not protect him. The kingdom did not love him. He owes them, in any strict moral sense, nothing. But the kingdom is, in any softer moral sense, his. He was born there. The people who are suffering are people he knows. The regent is, in a way the show is careful to acknowledge, the closest thing he has to a father, even if the father is monstrous. The choice the show is putting in front of him is the choice every adult child of a difficult parent has to make at some point. Do you go back? Do you owe them anything? Do you go back not for them, but for the others who are still trapped where you came from? The show does not make him answer right away. It lets him sit with the question. It lets him resent it. It lets him imagine refusing. It lets him imagine going. It lets him put down the flute and pick it up again. And the second part of the episode is, in some sense, a long meditation on the impossibility of either answer being right. There is no answer here that does not cost him something. There is no answer here that does not cost the lemon people something. There is no answer here that does not cost Lemongrab himself something. The show holds you in the question for longer than most shows would dare, and that holding is, in the end, the point. What Lemonhope eventually does, the show stages with extraordinary gentleness. He goes back not because he wants to. He goes back because the show has, very quietly, taught him that he is the only one who can. He arrives at the kingdom. He finds it as he left it. He confronts the regent in a way that is not really a confrontation, in a way that is more like a child standing in front of the parent who broke him and refusing, for the first time, to be afraid. He plays his flute. He sings in a voice that is not the regent's voice. He very gently dismantles the kingdom by being the kind of person the kingdom had no language for. The show does not have him kill Lemongrab. The show does not have him cast Lemongrab out. The show does not, in the surface sense, defeat the regent at all. What it does is something much stranger. It releases the lemon people. It takes them away from the castle. It leads them in a long, slow walk out of the kingdom and into the Candylands, where they will, the show implies, find a different way of being. The regent is left behind in a castle that is, again, empty. He is alone the way he was at the beginning. The kingdom in some sense ends. The arc in some sense closes. The regent stays in his chair, and the people walk away. It is a remarkable choice on the show's part not to give Lemonhope a more conclusive victory. He does not slay the regent. He does not bring the regent to justice. He does not in any clear way hold the regent to account for what he did. He just removes the people the regent was hurting. He, in effect, takes the source of the regent's harm out of his reach. The regent is left in his castle, with his throne, with his administrative vocabulary, with nobody to administer. He has, again, been put in his castle and left to fend for himself. The cycle that began with Bubblegum closes with Lemonhope, and the show, very pointedly, does not have anybody come for him after the kingdom empties. What you are meant to feel at the end of this story is something close to mourning. You are not meant to feel triumph. You are not meant to feel that justice has been done. You are meant to feel that something terrible has, at last, stopped happening, and that the cost of stopping it has been borne by everybody. The lemon people have lost their home. Lemonhope has lost his childhood. The regent has lost his kingdom. Bubblegum, in some sense the show never quite states out loud, has lost the contingency she once thought she had. The Earl of Lemongrab is, by the end of the second episode, not the manager of a kingdom. He is a person in a building, and the building is empty. I want to slow down on one more beat from the second episode, because I think it is one of the bravest things the show ever did. The way Lemonhope leaves the kingdom, at the very end, is not by going back to flannel. It is by going on. He does not return to the soft life he had begun to build. He sets out instead into the world. He has, the show implies, a life ahead of him that is not the kingdom and not the cottage. He is going to have to figure out, on his own, what he is now. The kingdom shaped him. The cottage healed him a little. But neither of those is where the rest of his life takes place. The rest of his life, the show implies, will be its own thing, and the child, after carrying so much, will have to find out what it is to be a person who does not have to carry it anymore. That is, in the end, the answer the show offers to the question of what we owe the people who made us. We owe them, the show says, at least the courage to go back. We owe them, the show says, at least the willingness to free the people they are still hurting if we are the only ones who can. But we do not owe them, the show says, our whole lives. We do not have to stay. We do not have to mend the kingdom they ruined. We do not have to live in the house they built. Once we have, in our own way, done what only we can do, we are allowed to leave. We are allowed to walk away. We are allowed to have a life that is not the kingdom. And that is the freedom the show at last gives Lemonhope. The freedom after everything to keep going. The regent, sitting in his chair with the castle empty around him, is the cost of that freedom. He is the price the show is willing to pay. He is the cost of the child being allowed to be a child. The show does not pretend the cost is not real. It does not pretend that there is not in the regent's loneliness a real grief. But it does not in the end ask the child to bear that grief for him. It lets the regent be alone. It lets the kingdom be empty. And it lets Lemonhope walk into a future that is, for the first time in this whole arc, his own. I want to take a long stretch now to talk about Bubblegum, because the Lemongrab story is, in many ways, her story too. The whole arc, from the chamber to the empty castle, is the long shadow of choices she made. The show, very carefully, does not let her off the hook for any of them, but it also, very carefully, does not turn her into a villain. What it does, instead, is one of the most interesting things any animated show has done with a parent figure. It shows you a creator who is brilliant and kind in many of the ways that matter to the people closest to her, and capable of love, and capable of grief, and yet who, in the specific case of Lemongrab, is responsible for one of the most extended sadnesses in the show's universe. Bubblegum is, by the time of the events of Too Young, an experienced ruler. She has built the kingdom. She has built the candy people. She has dealt with crises that would have undone a less capable monarch. She is, in many of the metrics the show uses, a successful sovereign. The candy people, on the whole, love her, they trust her, they follow her, the kingdom is functional, the streets are safe, the economy, such as it is, works. The threats from outside the kingdom are managed. By the standards of governance, she is doing well. The thing she is not doing, and this is the gap the Lemongrab arc opens up, is parenting. She is, in her language about her citizens, frequently maternal. She speaks of them as her children. She speaks of herself as their protector. She makes decisions about them that a parent would make about a small child. But she does not, in any of her interactions with them, give them the kind of attention a parent would give a child. She is not present with them. She is not in their daily lives. She does not, in any meaningful sense, raise them. She is, more accurately, their landlord, or their general, or their employer. She has responsibility for their welfare in a managerial sense. She does not, in the show's terms, have responsibility for their hearts. This works more or less in the day-to-day kingdom. The candy people are gentle. They are easily managed. They are happy to be left more or less alone, with occasional intervention from on high, and they do not, on the whole, need a parent in the way Lemongrab needs one. The problem is that Lemongrab is not like them. He was not made to be like them. He was made specifically to be a regent, which is to say, to be more like Bubblegum than like the candy people. He was made with administrative authority, with the vocabulary for governance, with a body capable of imposing law. And by making him this way, she made him a creature who could only have lived under her actual attention. He was not made to be left to figure things out alone. He was made to be partnered with her in the running of the kingdom, and she, having made him, did not partner with him. You can read this as Bubblegum's central blind spot. She knows how to build people. She does not, in the same way, know how to live with the people she builds. She is, by her own preference, a solitary creature. She lives in her castle. She works in her laboratory. She likes silence and study. She likes work. She does not, by her own preference, want to share her days with anybody. The candy people, on the whole, accommodate this. They do not require her constant company. Lemongrab, by contrast, would have required it. He was, by the way he was made, a creature who would only have worked if somebody had been there, in the room, every day, helping him learn what being a regent actually meant. And Bubblegum was not, by her own preference, willing to be that person. This is, I think, where the show's deepest critique of her sits. She is not punished for being a difficult parent, because she was a bad person. She is gently and at length shown to be the kind of person whose competencies do not include the day-to-day labor of being there for somebody else. She can design a being. She cannot in the same way parent one. And she made, in Lemongrab, a being who needed parenting more than any other creature in the kingdom. The mismatch between what he needed and what she was willing to give, the show makes this mismatch even more legible by surrounding Bubblegum with other characters who could parent. Finn is good with children. Jake is, by the end of the show, a literal father, and a soft and attentive one. Marceline, in her own way, mothers the people she loves. The show has in its cast several models of the kind of person who could have been in the laboratory the day Lemongrab was born, and could have, just by being present, given him a different start. None of them were. The show is, in its own quiet way, pointing out that Bubblegum could have asked one of them for help. She could have, at any point, brought somebody warm into the laboratory and asked them to be in the room when the chamber opened. She did not. She did it alone. She did it as a piece of administration. She did it in the same room she did her science. And the being who came out of the chamber was, from his first second, a being whose only context for the world was a laboratory and a queen who was thinking about something else. It is worth being honest about how often Bubblegum is given the chance, throughout the arc, to do better, and chooses in small ways not to. She has the chance in the first episode to take him seriously. She does not. She has the chance in his second appearance to be a partner in finding him a companion, and instead she hands him a duplicate as if he were a customer making a request. She has the chance, when the news of All Your Fault reaches her, to face what has become of her experiment, and instead she does the managerial thing and arranges for the worst of the mess to be cleaned up without actually changing the underlying structure. She has the chance, by the time of Too Old, to intervene before he does the worst thing he will ever do, and she does not. She has the chance, after Lemonhope frees the Lemon people, to take responsibility for what she set in motion, and the show, very precisely, lets her not. It is, I think, important to note that the show does not punish her for this. It does not have her face the regent and explain her mistakes. It does not have her apologize. It does not have her grieve on screen in a way that would let her find any kind of closure. It lets her, instead, go on. She continues to rule. She continues to live. She continues to be, in many of the show's later arcs, the brilliant queen we have always known her to be. Her tragedy with Lemongrab is just, in the larger life of the show, one of the things she has done. The show, again, refuses to hand you the comfort of either condemning her completely or excusing her completely. She is, in the world of the show, both a queen the kingdom needs and a maker who failed a single one of her creations. Both of those things are true. The show wants you to hold them both, in the same way it wants you to hold Lemongrab's victimhood and his cruelty together. There is a deeper conversation in this part of the arc about what creation is. Bubblegum's view of creation, which the show makes more or less explicit over the course of the series, is functional. She makes beings to serve specific purposes. She makes citizens to populate her kingdom. She makes regents to hold thrones. She makes objects in some ways more than she makes people. She is doing science. She is doing engineering. She is, in some scenes, doing what looks more like manufacturing than parenthood. And the regents she makes in this way are, by the time the show shows you them, regents who have a kind of finishedness about them when they come out of the chamber, who do not, in her view, require further raising. They are, she seems to assume, complete on arrival. The show, in the Lemongrab arc, is arguing against that view, very persistently, very gently. Nothing that comes out of a chamber is finished. Nothing that is born is finished. The labor of being a person is the labor of becoming one, and becoming a person requires another person, and the other person has to choose to do the work. Bubblegum did not choose to do the work. She did not, in fact, even know there was work to do. She thought she had made a regent. The show argues, episode by episode, that what she had really done is started a person, and that the person, having been started, then needed somebody to keep starting him every day for years. That somebody was supposed to be her, and it was not. The fact that Lemongrab eventually does the same thing to his lemon people is, in this reading, an inheritance. He learned the model from her. He learned that you start a person and then leave them to be a finished thing. He did it the way she did it, only worse, because he had even less to give than she did. The line of the tragedy runs from Bubblegum's hands into his hands into the hands of every lemon person he made. The line is straight. The show, in the end, is asking you to see it. There is one last thing about Bubblegum that I want to leave you with before we move on. The show does, at various points, give her moments of recognition. She does, at times, look at what she has done and see it. She does not, in those moments, change her behavior very much, but she does, in some quiet way, understand. She knows. She knows that the regent she made is broken. She knows that the kingdom she built for him is broken. She knows that the lemon people, in their broken bodies, are the consequences of choices she made. And she carries that knowledge, without comment, through the rest of the show. The show does not give her the cleansing scene that would let her be free of it. It gives her, instead, the silent burden of the knowledge. She rules her kingdom. She does her work. She lives her long, brilliant, useful life. And behind all of that, she knows about the Earl on the edge of the Candylands. She knows about the brother he absorbed. She knows about the people who walked away. She does not, in the show, ever fully forgive herself for any of it. And the show does not, in the end, fully forgive her either. That is, in many ways, the most adult thing the Lemongrab arc does. It refuses to give the maker the absolution the maker might want, And it also refuses to give the audience the satisfaction of seeing her condemned. It just lets her live with it. It lets her be the kind of person who, having done what she did, has to be the kind of person who did that. The kingdom continues. The Earl is alone. The lemon people walk into the Candylands, and the queen who started all of it goes back to her castle and gets on with the rest of her work. Quieter perhaps than she was before, but not changed in any way the audience can easily see. It is worth, for a stretch, stepping outside the world of the show and talking about how this character was actually built. The shape of Lemongrab on the page, in the storyboards, in the design notes, is one thing. The shape of him on the screen, in the body of an episode, in the rhythm of a scene, is something else. And a lot of what makes him feel like a tragedy rather than a joke comes from production choices that were not necessarily inevitable. Different choices would have produced a different character. The character we have is the character a particular set of artists, working together, decided to make. The voice, in particular, did not have to sound the way it sounds. The original performance was given by Justin Roiland, who voiced the character through the show's original run, and whose vocal choices shaped how every later writer and storyboard artist thought about Lemongrab. Whatever you think about the rest of the work this performer has been involved in over the years, the work he did inside the booth on these episodes is by any honest standard distinctive. The voice he gave the character is unlike any other voice in the show, and it is unlike any other voice in animation around it. It does things vocally that most cartoon voices are not allowed to do. It cracks, it strains, it sits for long stretches at a pitch that is uncomfortable for the listener and clearly uncomfortable for the performer. It refuses to soften into a comedic register, even when the line on the page would have allowed it. Decisions like that are not minor. The decision to give the voice that texture, to let the strain be audible, to allow the breath to break, is a decision that makes the character a tragedy in the listener's ear. A different performer would have given a different voice. A more comedic performer would have given a louder, more comfortable scream. A more melodramatic performer would have given a fuller theatrical roar. The voice we got is, by contrast, a voice that is in pain at the level of the throat. The discomfort of the voice is the engine of the character's pathos. Without that vocal choice, Lemongrab is a much less haunting figure. With it, he becomes one of the show's defining presences. The show's writers and storyboard artists working around that voice made the second set of decisions that build the character. They wrote scenes that put the voice in situations where its discomfort would land. They wrote scenes that put the voice next to its own quieter self, by giving him a song or a brother to harmonize with. They wrote scenes where the voice had to try and fail to be calm. They wrote scenes where the voice was the only voice in the room and the silence around it made it sadder. The voice was a gift the show received from the booth, and the writing room then spent years figuring out how to put it in the right scenes. The look of the character was, in its own way, doing the same thing. The design is, on paper, comedic. He is tall. He is yellow. He has a head that does not seem to match the body. He has eyes that are too wide, a mouth that opens too far, hands that hang at the ends of arms that are too long. He is a creature designed to look funny, but the way the show animates him, especially in his quieter moments, refuses to lean on the comedy. The wide eyes can be terror as easily as surprise. The long hands can be reaching as easily as flailing. The body that is too tall can stoop into a posture of exhaustion as easily as it can rise into a posture of authority. The design is comedy. The animation, when the show wants it to, is grief. There is, I think, a useful way to think about this. Adventure Time, as a series, was made by a group of people who came up through comics and indie animation, who shared, broadly, a sensibility that was equal parts whimsical and emotionally honest. The show is funny. The show is also, at its best, willing to take its characters' feelings at face value. The Lemongrab arc is one of the clearest examples of this sensibility being applied to a character who could easily have been a one-note joke. The team that wrote and storyboarded and animated him decided very early that he was going to be a person and not a gag. The voice gave them the door in. The writing kept making the rooms inside it bigger. It is worth noting that the show was structurally set up to allow this. Adventure Time was famous in its production model for handing very large amounts of creative control to its storyboard artists. The writers would deliver outlines. The storyboard artists, working in pairs, would then write and draw their episodes more or less in tandem. This meant that the show was able to lean into the obsessions and instincts of the particular artists who happened to be drawn to a given character. The artists who were drawn to Lemongrab were, on the whole, artists who were drawn to the sadder corners of the show. Several of the episodes in the arc were storyboarded by artists who had also worked on the Ice King's saddest material. The two characters share in their production lineage a willingness to be felt as well as laughed at. The show also benefited throughout the Lemongrab arc from a music team that took the songs seriously. Lemongrab's quieter moments in many of his episodes are scored by music that does not pander. The songs are simple, they are restrained. They do not try to push the emotion harder than it needs to go. They let the small melody he is humming be small. They let the duet between the brothers be quiet. They let the flute in Lemonhope's hands be a flute, not a fanfare. The musical choices are the third set of decisions that make this arc what it is. The voice gives you the discomfort, the animation gives you the body, the music gives you the soul. The three together produce on the screen a character who is greater than any of his ingredients. It is also worth marking the writer's restraint with the screaming, because over years and seasons there were many opportunities to make the scream louder, more frequent, more comedic. The show, for the most part, chose not to. The scream is, in any given episode, used sparingly. The episodes that have him in them tend to use him as a quiet presence, with occasional outbursts, not as a constant alarm bell. By holding the screaming back, the show makes the screaming, when it arrives, mean something. If he screamed in every scene, the scream would become wallpaper. By spacing the screams, the show lets each one carry the weight of all the others. That is, by any standard, mature storytelling, and it is not what a less careful production would have done with a character with that kind of catchphrase. The other thing worth noting in production terms is how committed the show was to following him through. A lot of cartoon shows would have introduced a character like Lemongrab in his first episode and never used him again, or used him only for occasional cameos. Adventure Time went the other way. It kept coming back to him. It built whole multi-episode arcs around him. It gave him brothers and children and a kingdom and an end. The show, by giving him this much room, was making, in effect, a long-form argument about him. The argument required time. The argument required several episodes. The argument required, in the end, the patience of a writer's room that knew it was making something difficult and decided to make it anyway. The show is not, by the standards of network animation, supposed to be allowed to make this kind of argument. It made it anyway, and the network mostly let it. There has, over the years, been a small but real conversation among fans and critics about whether the Lemongrab arc went too far for the show's audience. Some viewers were genuinely shaken by the cannibalism episode. Some parents argued at the time that the show had crossed a line that a Cartoon Network program should not have crossed. Defenders argued that the arc was earned, that the act was necessary to the moral architecture, and that children's animation has a long history of being unafraid to show difficult things to its audience. The argument has, more or less, settled in the years since. The arc is now widely regarded, among people who follow this kind of work, as one of the show's most ambitious experiments. The cannibalism episode is studied. The Lemonhope episodes are studied. The Bubblegum arc, including her role in this story, is studied. The show, in deciding to make this arc, was deciding to make a piece of work that would outlive its time slot. That decision, in hindsight, looks correct. It is also worth acknowledging that the show's wider cultural moment shaped how this arc landed. Adventure Time aired during a stretch when American animation, especially the work coming out of Cartoon Network and Disney, was reconsidering what children's shows could do. It overlapped with a generation of programs that took feeling seriously, that allowed grief and confusion and moral complexity into worlds that a decade earlier would have been required to keep their stories simple. The Lemongrab arc is, among other things, one of the high watermarks of that moment. It is one of the clearest pieces of evidence that, for a stretch of years, children's animation in the United States was allowed to grapple with adult questions about creation and responsibility and abandonment, and to do so without losing its audience. The thing the production decided to make, in the end, is a character whose voice you cannot forget, and whose story you cannot quite walk away from. The voice is the first thing. The story is the rest. The two together are what make Lemongrab the character he is. The work of remembering him fairly, as a viewer, is to remember both. Not just the scream, not just the catchphrase. The whole shape of the work that put him on the screen, and the patience the show showed in following him through. In the years since the show finished, Lemongrab has been one of the most consistently discussed characters in its fandom, and the discussions have, over time, taken some interesting shapes. Different communities have read him in different ways. The character has, in effect, become a vessel for a number of conversations about how people are made by the conditions they grow up in, and what we owe to creatures whose worst behavior is, in some clear sense, a symptom of how they were treated. I want to spend a stretch on these readings partly because they are interesting in their own right, and partly because the question of why Lemongrab matters to people is, by now, almost as much a part of the character as the episodes themselves. The reading that comes up most often is the reading of him as a person with neurodivergent traits. or as a creature whose behavior can be read through the lens of how the world treats people whose nervous systems are wired differently. The screaming in this reading is the externalized version of a kind of overwhelm. The catchphrase is a stim. The rigid attachment to order is a real cognitive style being shown to you under cartoon makeup. The cruelty of the kingdom is what happens when somebody whose mind works in this way is given complete authority over others without ever being given the support that would let him understand what others' minds need. The reading is, in some ways, not a comfortable one. It is not, on the surface, a sympathetic depiction of any specific neurodivergent person. It is, more accurately, an account of what happens to a person with certain traits when nobody in their life is willing to do the work of helping them live with those traits. The result in the show is a person who is a danger to himself and to everybody around him. The reading is sympathetic not because it claims he is harmless. It is sympathetic because it claims he could have been all right. This reading has been argued about both inside and outside the autistic community. Some viewers find it useful. They see in him a version of themselves under conditions of total neglect, and they find the show's refusal to write him off as monstrous to be unexpectedly affirming. Some viewers, conversely, find it troubling. They worry that the reading associates traits they share with cruelty they do not, and they push back on the idea that the character is, in any clear way, a positive representation. Both responses are legitimate. The show, for what it is worth, does not announce that it is doing this. It does not put any specific clinical word in any character's mouth. It builds a creature whose behavior can be read this way, and it leaves the reading to the audience. The fact that the reading has stuck around for so many years is, in itself, a piece of evidence that the show was building something with that reading available, even if it would never have said so out loud. A related but distinct reading is the trauma reading. This one treats Lemongrab less as a person with inborn neurological traits and more as a creature whose behavior is the result of how he was treated from the moment of his birth. In this reading, the screaming is what early neglect does to a nervous system. The rigid attachment to order is what untreated anxiety does over years. The cruelty is what happens when a child with no model of love grows into an adult with power. The kingdom is what happens when an unhealed person is given a population to rule. The reading is, on the whole, less about specific clinical categories and more about the general arc of what untended pain does to a person over time. The reading is also, in the show's universe, very well supported. Almost every detail of his behavior in this reading has a corresponding detail in his treatment. The harshness is the harshness he was met with. The volume is the volume he was raised at. The need for control is the need somebody develops when nothing in their early life felt under control. The cycle of abuse in this reading is the through line of the entire arc. A third reading, which sits next to those two, is the reading of him as a parable of bad parenting more generally. In this reading, the specific clinical and developmental categories are not central. What is central is the fact that he was made by somebody who did not stay with him afterwards. That fact, in the reading, is enough to explain everything else. The screaming, the cruelty, the kingdom, the brother, the lemon people, the regent in the empty castle at the end. All of it in this reading is what happens when a creator walks away from a creature. The reading does not require that Lemongrab be neurodivergent. It does not require that he have a specific trauma. It requires only that he have been left, and the leaving is enough. There is also a reading of him as a kind of child of an unstable home. The kingdom he eventually rules is, in this reading, a recreation of the home he grew up in. He is, in this reading, doing what his maker did to him. He is repeating the pattern in the way the pattern always repeats itself when nobody breaks it. The reading does not require any clinical lens at all. It only requires that you have, at some point, seen what happens when a person reproduces the harm they were raised with because they do not know what else to do. The show in this reading is making one of the oldest arguments about families. We become what we are given. We pass on what we were given. The way out, the show suggests, is not through better making. It is through somebody, somewhere in the chain, choosing to give different things, even if they themselves were not given them. A fourth reading, which often runs in parallel with the others, is the religious reading. The Candy Kingdom, in this reading, is a kind of Eden. Bubblegum is a creator god. Her creations are her people. Her creations are flawed by nature of having been made by somebody who could not give them everything they would need. The fall, in this reading, is built into the creation. Lemongrab is, in this reading, the version of the creator's image that comes out wrong. He is the version that cannot, in the language of the universe he is in, succeed. He is then given dominion over a corner of the world in a kind of test, and the test is impossible, and the test reveals not his failings, but the failings of his maker. The reading takes the show's moral architecture and lifts it into something almost biblical. The thing that makes the reading work is that the show's argument about responsibility does in fact sound very much like a religious one. Creators are responsible for what they create. The chain of responsibility flows back, all the way back, to the first hand. The first hand cannot in the end hide. The first hand is the one that is accountable. The show, in this reading, is doing theology under the cover of children's animation. A fifth reading, more political, treats the kingdom as a parable of governance. Lemongrab, in this reading, is a kind of figure for unfit rulers in general. He is not the worst case, but he is a particularly clear case. He has been given a kingdom he is not equipped to run. He has been given subjects he is not equipped to care for. He has been given authority he is not equipped to use. The result is not a good kingdom. The result is a kingdom whose people suffer. The reading, in its more general form, is about what happens when the criteria for being given power are mismatched with the criteria for being able to exercise it well. He was made to hold a throne. He was not made to govern. Those are different things. The reading argues that the show, in him, is making a point about every ruler who has been put in a role for reasons that have nothing to do with whether they can do the role well. The point lands harder when you remember that he is also, by every metric, a victim. The reading does not let the victim off the hook for the harm he does as a ruler. The reading argues exactly that ruling does not work that way. A bad ruler is a bad ruler, whatever the reasons for being bad. The people of the kingdom still suffer. The reading then asks, as a separate question, who is responsible for putting the bad ruler in charge in the first place? And again, the answer climbs back to Bubblegum. These readings, taken together, do not cancel each other out. They overlap. They reinforce one another. They share the central observation that the character is doing a lot of moral work for the show, and they offer different vocabularies for talking about what that work is. The reason the character has stayed alive in the fan conversation for as long as he has is that he supports all of these readings at once. He is, in effect, an unusually rich piece of writing. You can put almost any moral question about creation, about responsibility, about parenting, about authority, about pain, about cycles, into the shape of his arc, and the arc will hold the question. The arc has, over years, become a kind of communal object in the fandom. People bring their own questions to it. The arc gives back something to almost everyone who brings it something. There is one more reading I want to flag, because it is the one I personally find the most moving. This is the reading of him as a portrait of loneliness, as a condition rather than a feeling. In this reading, Lemongrab is not just a person who is lonely. He is a person whose entire existence is, in some sense, the structure of loneliness. He was made alone. He was raised alone. He was sent to a kingdom alone. He made a brother because being alone was unbearable. He absorbed the brother because the alternative was watching his loneliness become bearable through somebody else. He populated the kingdom with citizens who were, in some way, more versions of himself because the only loneliness he could imagine breaking was the loneliness of being one. He was, in the end, left alone in the empty castle, because that was, in some sense, what he had always been. The reading turns the entire arc into a portrait of a kind of being who is alone the way other beings are tall, or short, or yellow. It is the property of him. The kingdom did not give it to him. The kingdom only allowed it to express itself. The condition was there from the chamber. The arc is the long expression of it. The empty castle is its conclusion. The reason I find that reading moving is that it suggests, very gently, that the work of being human, or being a person, or being whatever Lemongrab is, includes the work of finding ways to live with loneliness without being destroyed by it. He does not have those ways. He is not given them. Almost nobody around him is given them either. The brother had, for a moment, something like a way, and the way did not last. Lemonhope, by the end of his arc, is on the brink of finding his own way, and the show, very pointedly, walks him out the door, so we will not have to see if he succeeds. The kingdom, in the end, is what happens when nobody finds the way. The kingdom, in the end, is what happens when you let the condition of being alone become the structure of your whole life. The show, in showing this to you, is asking you very quietly what you are doing about that condition in your own life. The show does not push the question. It just leaves the empty castle on screen for a beat too long, and trusts you to know what it means. After everything the show has shown you about him, it is worth asking in the most direct possible way what Adventure Time ultimately says about Lemongrab. Not what fans say, not what critics say, what the show, in its own choices, in its own time, in its own quiet moments at the end of episodes, is willing to commit to. Because the show is willing to commit to things, it is not, by the end of the arc, an open question. The show has chosen its position, and the position is, I think, more interesting than people sometimes give it credit for. The position is, first, that Lemongrab is responsible. The show does not at any point suggests that his suffering excuses what he did. It does not suggest that the lemon people are owed less acknowledgement of their pain because he was the one in pain. It does not suggest that the brother, sitting inside him after the absorption, is owed less mourning because the absorption was, in some sense, the result of his sickness. The show is, on this point, very clear. The harm is real. The harm happened. The harm was done by him. The fact that he was hurt is not a defense. The kingdom suffered. The kingdom's suffering is, in the moral arithmetic of the show, his fault. The position is, second, that Bubblegum is also responsible. The show is also very clear on this. Her hands are in the kingdom too. The chamber, the design, the abandonment, the long absence, the lack of help when help was offered, the lack of intervention when intervention was possible. All of it climbs back to her. The fact that she is also a competent ruler in many other contexts. The fact that she is also kind in many other contexts. The fact that she is also doing many other things that benefit the candy world does not, in the show's terms, cancel her share of what happened. The shares are not zero-sum. Both of them did harm. Both of them were responsible. The position is, third, that this is what the world looks like. The show does not, in the end, give you a place where one of them is condemned and the other is not. It does not give you a place where both of them are exiled. It does not give you a place where either of them faces a court. The kingdom is what it is. The regent is in his chair. The queen is in her castle. The lemon people are walking away. Lemonhope is going on. The world, after the arc, does not deliver justice in any clean form. It delivers, instead, the next day. The next day comes, people who were hurt have to figure out what to do with the hurt. People who hurt others have to figure out what to do with the fact that they did. The show is not interested in tying any of it off with a bow. It is interested in showing you what carrying on after harm actually looks like. This is, I think, the most adult thing the show offers. It refuses, at every turn, the satisfaction of a clean ending. It refuses to make Lemongrab a villain whose defeat would close the story. It refuses to make him a tragic hero whose rehabilitation would close the story. It refuses to make Bubblegum face him. It refuses to make her atone. It refuses to make the kingdom either continue or end definitively. It just lets the situation stand in its complicated, irreducible reality and asks you to keep looking at it. The reason this works, dramatically, is that the show has earned the refusal. It has put in the time. It has shown you, episode by episode, what the cost of every choice has been. It has, by the time of the final episodes in the arc, taught you to mistrust easy resolutions. You would not believe a clean ending here, even if it were offered. The show is making, at the end, the only ending you could believe in, which is the ending where nothing is fully resolved, and life carries on anyway. That is the world we actually live in. The show is borrowing that fact and using it as a structural device. The other thing the show ultimately says about him is that he is, in some real sense, the consequence of a society that does not have a good way of caring for people who are hard to care for. The kingdom of the candy people is, in many ways, a good kingdom. It is well organized. The citizens are mostly content. The visitors are mostly welcomed, but the kingdom does not have, in any visible form, an institution that would have taken Lemongrab and given him what he needed. There is no equivalent of a school. There is no equivalent of a therapist. There is no equivalent of a support network. The kingdom is good at the easy version of governance, where the citizens are gentle and the problems are small. The kingdom is bad at the hard version of governance, where a difficult creature is born and the difficult creature needs more than the standard treatment to flourish. The show, very gently, is making a point about that. The kingdom is not built for him. The kingdom does not become built for him. The kingdom never expands its structures to accommodate him. He is, in effect, treated as a single-point failure, exported to the edge of the map, and never brought back inside the design. That is a structural critique, and it is one the show has been making in various forms throughout its run. The Ice King is another version of this. He is a creature whose pain is also, in some sense, beyond what the kingdoms of the show are equipped to address. He is allowed by the broader community to live in his ice castle and to be a nuisance and to occasionally menace the world. He is not, until very late, given the kind of help that would actually have changed his life. The Ice King's arc and Lemongrab's arc are, in this sense, twins. Both are creatures whose neighbors have decided to manage rather than to heal. The Ice King is rescued in the end. Lemongrab is not. The difference in the show's terms is partly that the Ice King has Marceline. He has somebody who knew him before he was broken, who remembers the person underneath the brokenness, and who, when the time comes, is willing to do the work of helping him come back to that person. Lemongrab does not have a Marceline. He does not have anybody who knew him before he was him. He does not have anybody who is willing to do that work. So he stays in his castle, so he ends, by the time the arc is closed, where he started, only emptier. The show is, in this contrast, making one of its quietest arguments. The thing that lets a person come back from the kind of life Lemongrab has had is almost always somebody who remembers them. Somebody who has continuity with the person they were before the damage. Somebody who can hold the through line for them when they have lost the thread. The Ice King has Marceline, Finn has Jake, Bubblegum has, in her own complicated way, Marceline as well. Almost every character in the show who comes back from a bad place has somebody. Lemongrab does not. He was made. He was sent away. He was alone, and the people who could have been that person to him, the people who could have held the thread for him, are the people who in fact made him and sent him away. There is nobody else. The structure of his life forecloses from the start the kind of relationship that, in the show's universe, is the actual mechanism of healing. That is, in some ways, the deepest thing the show ultimately says about him. The thing he needed, more than a different kingdom or a different role or a different set of laws, was a person who would stay. The person who could have stayed was Bubblegum. Bubblegum did not stay. There was nobody else. The kingdom that surrounded him was not equipped to produce a stayer. The brother was briefly going to be one, and the brother was lost. Lemonhope was briefly going to be one, and Lemonhope, very correctly, chose his own life. The chain of people who could have stayed with Lemongrab is, in the end, a chain of people who, for very understandable reasons, did not. The regent in the empty castle is the sum of that chain. He is the residue the show is saying of everybody who had a chance to stay and did not. That is not a comforting position. The show, in adopting it, is not handing you an inspirational note. It is asking you to sit with what it actually means. The lonely creature in the empty castle is, in some real way, what neglect produces. He is not a special case. He is what people become when nobody stays. The show is saying very gently that the labor of preventing more creatures like him is the labor of staying with the difficult ones. The labor of staying, the labor of not exporting them to the edge of the map. The labor of not pretending, with administrative convenience, that the problem can be managed by geography. The labor of, in the end, being present for the people who are hard to be present for. The show, in its quiet way, is saying that we are, all of us, capable of producing more Lemongrabs by not doing this labor. The Lemongrab in the castle is the lesson. The lesson is not exactly that he is fixable. The lesson is that he should not have happened in the first place, and that the not happening would have required a kind of staying we are not, on the whole, very good at. This is the heart of why the arc has lasted. Not just because the screams are funny, though they are. Not just because the imagery is unforgettable, though it is. Not just because the cannibalism episode is shocking, though it is shocking. The arc has lasted because it is, in the most quiet and patient way, an argument about staying. The argument is delivered through the failure of staying. The argument is delivered, in negative, by showing you what happens when nobody does. And the argument lands on the audience with a weight that has very little to do with cartoons. It lands as an argument about real life, about real people, about what real care requires, about what its absence produces. The empty castle with the regent in it is the show's final image of the arc. It is, on the surface, a bleak image, but it is also, when you sit with it, an image that holds a certain kind of moral clarity. The regent is alone because nobody stayed. The kingdom is empty because the regent could not, on his own, hold it together. The lemon people are walking away because the only person who could not have stayed for them was Lemonhope, and Lemonhope chose, very correctly, to keep walking. The image is the picture of what happens, very plainly, in a world where the staying did not happen. The image is the show, at the end of the arc, asking you to see it. And the show, in showing you the image, is, in some quiet way, asking you to do better in your own life. To stay with the people who need somebody to stay with them. To be the kind of person who is willing to sit in the room with a creature who is hard to sit with, until the creature stops being hard, or until you do, or both. To be, in some sense, more Lemongrabs. That is what the show ultimately says. It is not, I think, a small thing to say. It is, in some ways, the largest thing a cartoon has ever tried to say. The fact that the show says it without saying it by simply leaving the empty castle on the screen and asking you to feel it is what makes it land. It is also worth asking where Lemongrab sits in the larger architecture of Adventure Time, because his arc does not happen in isolation. The show is, throughout its long run, telling many stories at once, and the Lemongrab story is one of several threads about creation and damage that the writers were following over years. The Ice King, who I mentioned a moment ago, is the most famous of these threads. He is a wizard who used to be a man, who lost himself slowly to a crown, who became, by stages, a frightening and pitiable creature who menaces the world without really understanding what he is doing. His arc is in many ways the show's most decorated piece of writing. It is also, in many ways, the closest sibling to the Lemongrab arc the show ever made. The two characters share more than people sometimes notice. Both of them are loud, both of them are difficult. Both of them are in their first appearances comedic. Both of them are, by the time the show is finished with them, profoundly sad. Both of them are creatures whose worst behavior is, in some clear sense, a symptom of a long damage they did not entirely cause. Both of them are surrounded by other characters who have learned, over time, to manage them rather than to help them. Both of them are, in the end, given moments of grace that do not, on their own, undo what they have done, but that ask the audience to remember that they are people. The differences between them are also instructive. The Ice King is, before his transformation, a person we eventually get to meet. We see Simon, the man inside the king, in flashbacks and songs, in moments of unexpected lucidity. We know by the end of the series what he was like before he was broken. We know who he was to Marceline. We know who he was to himself. That knowledge changes how we feel about him. It lets us see in his worst behavior the residue of a person we have been allowed to like. The Ice King's arc on this level is the arc of a person being lost slowly to something he cannot help. The audience is given the before and the during, and the after, and is asked to grieve the loss of the before through every minute of the during. Lemongrab does not have a before. There is no version of him we get to meet who was in some prior life, somebody we could have liked. He came out of the chamber the way he is. The voice he had on the first day was the voice he had on the last day. There is no Simon underneath the Earl. He is, in some real sense, only the Earl. And this is, in its own way, what makes his story harder to bear. We are not asked to grieve a person who used to be different. We are asked, instead, to grieve a person who never had the chance to be different. The damage in his case is not what was done to a person who once existed. The damage is the person himself. The damage is who he is. And the show, in refusing to give him a Simon, is making one of its most uncomfortable arguments, which is that some people are in fact made the way they are by the conditions of their birth, and the work of helping them is the work of helping who they actually are, not the work of restoring some prior, better version. There is no prior, better version. There is only him as he is. The work, if it is to be done, has to be done with him as he is, and the work in the kingdom of the show is not done. There is also a useful way of placing him next to the Lich, who is one of the show's most central villains. The Lich is, in some ways, the moral opposite of Lemongrab. He is power without person. He is, in his deepest form, almost an abstraction. He is what evil looks like when it is allowed to become a pure force, untethered from any creature who could feel its consequences. The show treats him with horror, but not with sympathy, because there is no person inside him to be sympathetic to. The Lich is a hole in the universe. Lemongrab is, by contrast, a full person, painfully so. He is somebody. He is in pain. He is doing harm. He is, in the show's terms, one of the people the moral universe has to make room for. The Lich does not have to be made room for. The Lich has to be defeated. Lemongrab, the show suggests, cannot be defeated. He can only be lived with, or not. The fact that the show is willing to make this distinction between a creature who is evil in a way that requires resistance and a creature who is doing harm in a way that requires understanding is itself one of the things that makes Adventure Time as a moral text more interesting than it gets credit for. Most cartoons do not have a category for both kinds of antagonist. Most cartoons have villains, and the villains have to be defeated. Adventure Time has villains, and it has Lemongrab, and the show insists throughout its run that these are not the same kind of problem. They cannot be handled the same way. The Lich has to be fought. Lemongrab has to be heard. The show says this in the most patient possible way, by spending so many episodes asking you to listen to him, even when his voice is making it hard. There is, by the late years of the show, a sense in which Lemongrab has become part of the moral fabric of the world. He is a fact. The kingdom on the edge of the Candylands is a fact. The Lemon people, having walked away, are a fact. Somewhere in the Candy world, building whatever new life they can build. The regent in the empty castle is a fact. He is no longer a problem to be solved. He is a part of the landscape. The show, when it goes back to the Candylands in later episodes, does not always check on him. He is simply there. He is the cost of how the kingdom was built. He is the cost of how Bubblegum has chosen to live. He is the cost of every quiet, comfortable day in the kingdom, sitting at the edge of the map, in a building nobody visits. The show, in placing him there permanently, is making again a structural point. He is what is at the edge. He is the price of the center. This is, by a margin, one of the most adult ways of handling a difficult character that any cartoon has tried. He does not get a redemption arc. he does not get a goodbye. He just continues to exist, somewhere off screen, in the world the show has built. And every time the show returns to the Candylands, you remember that he is out there. You remember that the kingdom you are watching has a shadow. You remember that the shadow has a name. You remember the name, you remember the scream. You remember the song. You remember the brother. You remember the lemon people walking away. You remember the child with the flute. You remember the empty castle. And the show, entrusting you with all of that memory, is giving you one of the most generous things it can give. It is giving you the moral landscape intact and asking you to carry it around with you. There are not many cartoons that ask you to do this. There are not many cartoons that are willing to. The fact that Adventure Time was willing to, and that it carried out the asking with so much patience over so many years, is one of the reasons people still talk about Lemongrab. He is, in the end, not a character. He is a kind of thought experiment with a voice. The thought experiment is about who we are responsible for and what we owe them, and what happens when we do not pay. And the voice screaming at you in the dark of the castle is the experiment running. If you are willing to listen, the scream becomes, eventually, a kind of music. Not a comfortable kind. Not a kind you would put on in the morning. A kind you would put on, perhaps, when you wanted to remember why staying matters. The kind you would put on when you wanted to remember why being there for somebody is not optional. The kind you would put on when you wanted to remember why the labor of presence is, in the end, the only labor that in this kind of arc makes any difference. The scream is the noise that comes out when nobody does the labor. The labor in the show would have been Bubblegum's. The labor in our lives is ours. That is, in the end, what the Lemongrab arc gives you after all the long episodes are over. It gives you a list of choices that, in a different life, would have made a different person. It gives you the names of those choices. It gives you the names of the people who could have made them. It gives you, in the end, the empty castle as the picture of what happens when none of them are made. And it asks you, very quietly, to make different choices in your own life, with the people you have, before any of them end up in an empty castle of their own. It is strange, sitting at the end of a story like this one, to think about the fact that Adventure Time was, on its surface, a comedy. The show people remember, the show that put a boy and a dog and a princess and a vampire and a snail on the screen and made them famous, is a funny one. People who never watched past the first few seasons remember the jokes. They remember the bright colors. They remember the songs about how mathematical the world is. They remember Jake stretching across rooms. They remember Finn with the green backpack. They remember the daytime version of the show. And the daytime version was, in its way, real. The show was funny. The show was very often joyful. The show was, at its highest moments, one of the most generous pieces of children's animation the United States has ever produced. But underneath the daytime version, the show was also doing this, and doing it for years. It was telling you a story about a creature who was made and then abandoned, and who, over many seasons, was patiently allowed to become, and then to grieve, and then to be left in his castle, alone. It was telling you, with no fanfare, that the world is not always kind to its creators or its creations, and that the work of being kind to either is the actual work of being alive. It was telling you that the most consequential thing you can do for somebody is to stay with them. It was telling you that the price of not staying is, sometimes, more than you can ever pay back. And it was telling you all of this through the screams of a tall yellow creature who, on a different day, in a different show, would have been only a joke. That is, in the end, what Adventure Time was. It was a show that did not have to do this and did it anyway. It was a show that took its audience seriously enough to risk this kind of writing on them. It was a show that trusted children to feel a sadness they could not yet name, and trusted that in the years to come, those children would grow up and come back to the show and find the sadness waiting for them, in the place they had left it, exactly where it was. Lemongrab is one of the largest of those sadnesses. The empty castle on the edge of the Candylands is still there, in the show, where it always was. If you go back, it is there. If you do not, it is there anyway. The show built it, and the show, very carefully, did not take it down. If you have made it this far, thank you for sitting with me through it. I hope, if you came here to fall asleep, that the long, slow walk through the kingdom has given you somewhere quiet to land. I hope, if you came here to remember, that the remembering was kind to you. And I hope, whatever brought you here, that you carry from the empty castle just a little of what the show is asking you to carry from it. Stay with the people who need you. Be present with the people who are hard to be present with. Do not, if you can help it, leave anybody at the edge of your map. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.